David, the whole team, take it away.
Will, is there anything else you wanted to add, or?
Anything? I got some feedback from some emails, some of the stuff in the reports, but if there's nothing in there, hiring seems to still be going well. We filled 2 more empty spots this week since I wrote the report, which is a good thing. And I talked to Karen about a couple of other concerns with food recycle program, and we'll be addressing that here this next month.
So I do just want to give kudos to principals and Will and those people involved in hiring. We are in a great place. I know many of our other districts are not in the same place as us. So I'm very thankful. We're very excited about who's joining us in the district. So we're good with that. Sheila, do you have something you need to add?
I do. I want to let you all know that Aaron did an amazing job on the budget, asking wonderful questions and digging deep. You're welcome.
And obviously we'll get a lot of time to hear from Aaron in the budget in a little bit. Appreciate that. And just to be clear, so as we're transitioning towards the end of this, so Aaron has built the budget and is in charge. And then if he gets stuck, he has Sheila. Sheila will be on through the audit because this is her budget, so it's her audit. So we'll keep her on through that process, and Aaron can continue to learn and have that backup. And then Sheila will move on to just grants, fiscal, managing those things, and sit down. I want to add a few more kudos. First off, we started the CMAS testing this week. It is very difficult to explain when your district runs so smoothly. That is not the experience of most districts in the state. It wasn't always our experience, but it has run so smoothly the last 2 days. It's just like a well-oiled machine. It's one of those things where when it's running amazing, everyone just assumes that's normal. It's not the norm. And so I'm very proud. Will let everybody and our deans, our counselors help, and so many staff. It is highly disruptive, but our district is able to do it with such kind of grace. I think it keeps the kids calm, and I do expect our kids to do well again on the tests. And that's because also we saw, I shared with you last week or so, a lot of our discipline data. This is one of the least amount of discipline frequency, so how many incidents have happened. And that means if kids aren't getting in trouble, they're normally engaged in lesson because, for instance, adolescents, if they're bored, they tend to get in trouble. So there is a relationship between those data points. And so just a big thanks to that piece. I also want to give a shout out to the kindergarten and the early childhood center and the staff. They had a enrollment kind of like orientation for kindergarten. I think it's for the kids, but it's a lot for the parents. And that was just an amazing success. So big kudos to that improvement on that team. I sat down with the school health professional grant that gives us a psychologist at the middle school and helps them with their new crew program and culture and building there. It's really also targeted around mental health. And of course, that early adolescent is a key moment for mental health. And as we did the mid-year evaluation, and it's kind of a self-perception, so I sat with the whole team. I was just blown away. It was at a scale of 1 to 5. Like 1, it's not in place. 5, it's in place and sustainable. And almost every question of the system that they built, they all believed that they had sustainable mental health systems. Every single kid gets screening. Every single kid gets that tier 1 first and explicit instruction. And every single kid gets a second dose, so kind of tier 2, which is so helpful in that human development zone right there of middle school years. And so I was just really proud of them where they've come and as they continue to systematize kind of their world. There's a lot of other things going on in our district that I could just keep on celebrating. And so it is nice to see some stability in our systems getting back to a proactive stance. I do appreciate Aaron getting the budget done. To have a budget as solid as we do tonight puts us way ahead of many of our peers. We're in a very good space with those conversations. So all in all, I'm just coming after spring break. You know, that February zone is very hard in our system, and it will be every single year. And so coming out of spring break, I'm just very, very happy as a systems guy watching at 30,000 foot level that things are running in a very smooth fashion. We also got contracts out earlier than we ever have, which helped us with hiring, and those are going great. We also have schedules out to students here by the end of the month, which is the earliest we've been doing that. And so we are in a much better space than I've seen us in the last few years. And so I'm very proud of staff. It's been a hard push to get into that space. Just want to say thanks. I don't know if anybody has a question for Will or Aaron or Sheila or myself. Things we didn't get to in any of your reports or the packet.
Sounds like nothing except saving for later.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you all. Looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Karen. Any questions, comments?
Just make a note that we did move that 3I to action. It's no longer on the consent agenda.
Perfect. Ready for a vote?
All right. Mr. Hobbs. Mrs. Lumberg. Mrs. Pascal. Aye. Ms. Schickman. And Mr. Smith.
All right. Team, are we ready to dive into the budget, or do we need to stretch our legs for a minute? Diving in. All right, here we go. Aaron, Sheila, David, take it away. Do we have a presentation?
We do. Yeah.
Is it also printed here?
Is it what?
Is it also printed here?
It is not. It was finalized today. You will get a follow-up report from me. in later
Get
days.
yourself set up here, and then you can go. You got a second.
That's way to do this. I'm just gonna do it this way. This is an effective preventive stage. Give it a second here to
Stretch
come
those
up.
legs.
How close does this have to be to pick up on YouTube? Here? Perfect. It's not awkward at all. Okay.
It's item 4.
So first of all, you have a few things in front of you. I apologize. My report was obviously late coming. The budget's being built day by day right now, so it's constantly in flux. So I wanted to give you as much info to the day as possible. And so I was pushing it back and trying to get you the most information I could up to date. I'll just let you know we're still in flux. We're still not, most of it's put together. I'd say we're probably 95% done, 96%, somewhere in that range, but we're still diving into a few expenditures. We're still unsure on some revenues. So we'll go through some of those things together. And then I imagine you'll see some changes by next month. So expect that. I'm seeing stuff every day. In front of you, you have a few things. You have a copy of the strategic financial plan, which you all approved in the fall, and we're going to go through some of that. So I just wanted you to have a copy of it as a reminder of kind of some of the targets that we're seeking. You should have also the packets that I gave you just now, the short sheet. Well, the operational wish list will be the first thing you come to. That's what you saw last month with a few alterations to it, just to try to make sure that we were on the same page with really identifying a few things, and you'll see that in my presentation in a second as well. And then you have the budget sheet, both the short sheet and the long sheet for this year and the initial look at next year. So you can compare side by side. You'll also see a lot of that in the presentation, but that's if you need hard copies, that's what you have. So pretty excited about our budget so far. I mean, look how many people turned up for our budget conversation, right? This is amazing, super exciting. Shout out to Jesse and Darcy back there. Thank you. So this is our fiscal year 24-25 budget. I just started with this little quote because I think this is an overwhelming topic for a lot of people. It doesn't have to be overwhelming, but just this from Albert Einstein, the hardest thing in the world to understand is the income tax. Tax is complicated even for really smart people. So we're working through it together, but I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of a lot of these things right now. So I just wanted to point the community back to our strategic financial plan. This is how I'm operating as we're building the budget. Me, David, and Sheila, as well as all of you, as well as the multiple times we met with community members, with CBT, with the DAC, to try to make sure that this was in line. This is how we're operating. So if people have questions in general about the budget, this is one of my starting points. So I'm trying to point people back to this. If you're looking for copies online, we have them in the office. They're also posted to our website. So give them a look. This is an important picture. This is basically what I've looked like the past 2 weeks as I've stared at spreadsheets over and over again. So it's been a exciting time, as you can see. The point of the strategic financial plan is we wanted to create assumptions and definitions of what we're doing in our budget. We wanted to build parameters and walls that we can kind of strive to fall within. And then we wanted to really be intentional with clarity around transparency with what's in the budget, being able to compare ourselves to other districts, and then just you all defining priorities. Where do we want to put our money in staffing, in overhead, in savings? How do we define that? So that was the big push for the strategic financial plan this year, and I think it's coming together really, really well, as we'll see in a moment. I think the next piece is just giving you some background of how I built the budget this year. The first thing you do is you roll everything forward. You take every position, every line item across the board. There's thousands of individual codes. You roll everything into the new year, and then you start by finding out what your revenues are, and then you dive deep into your expenditures, and you try to go through as many lines as you can. You look at every single position in the district, who's coming back, who's not coming back, how does that affect the income, the expenditures. And then we get to a place where you're almost, then we dive into every line. I've met with every manager to talk through their budget and see how their operations are going. I've also met with each principal to talk about their building budgets. So it's a big process, but it's also an exciting process. So this next page, this is the short sheet from both 23, 24, which you've seen many times so far. And then next to it, you're going to see fiscal year 24, 25. The thing I want to really point out that's important is that fiscal year 24, 25 is changing daily. Just today, I found out we have 2 more positions where we've hired somebody at a lower rate than what we normally budget a vacant position. So that number is going to change even today. So it's different from what I showed CBT on Friday, although not hugely different. But it's changing pretty regularly over the next week or two. And so we're getting really close, but every day we're probably having 1% or so variance along the way. But the first thing we wanted to dive into was kind of the revenues. You'll see that our overall recurring revenues are up. There's a couple reasons for this. Like I said, we dive into what we get from the state. So first of all, our rural funding on the left, you're going to see that in one-time revenue projected. I believe Stacy Fillet talked about that today. We've pushed hard to get that out of having to ask for it every single year and getting it put into the state run. Right now, they've done that. They've applied it to the state run. There are conversations currently, as of Friday and yesterday, where they're looking at potentially taking that rural funding away from districts yet again. After last week, it looking like we were really guaranteed to get it. Now it looks like it's up for debate. I think there's going to be a lot of money up for debate. As we've seen, the state has between 150 and $300 million shortfall. And by law, they have to balance the budget. That money's got to come from somewhere. I expect some of it's going to come from schools, so we might see some decreases there. The rural funding was one thing that I just am monitoring. This on the right, the recurring revenue projected, does show that they've bought down the BS factor next year. Our legislators have chosen to go that route. Again, as Stacy stated, that's a big push. I think at this point that will stay the case. I think they will stay with the budget stabilization. However, again, they have to find a way to balance the budget. So I think there's going to be something that shows up where our revenues are not exactly what they think they will be. So that's a big piece of it. Another one is UPK, which has been the mess all year. We are not getting 3-year-old funding next year. That was about $156,000 this year of revenue that we got. We're trying to find ways to make that up. Teresa has been working hard with the county, and I think we have some opportunities to get some of that money back. She feels pretty confident in her work with the county with CCAP funding, I believe is what it's called. We do not have anything in writing yet, though, so that is not built into this budget yet. But I do think there's a pretty promising chance that we could get some of that money. When we get the run from the governor, we get one about every month or every 3 months, depending on the time of year. They're coming out pretty regularly right now as they're changing the budget. They're looking at the finance formula. So when I say the state run, what that is we get a sheet that has every single school district. It breaks up per pupil funding. It adds in all of your different factors like ELL students, at-risk students, in this case, the BS factor and so forth. Our per pupil funding this year has gone up dramatically. Largely that's because the BS factor has been bought down and rural funding has been applied to this. What we're projecting is we took that run and we subtracted about $300,000 off of what they're projecting our revenue is going to be. The reason we did that is because they had us projected at 13 student growth. We did not see any growth this year, so I'm pretty uncomfortable building the budget on that. So at $11,300 a kid, 13 kids, we're getting close to about $150,000 there. that I'm unconvinced of and definitely don't want to be promising yet, although it's possible. We did grow by 20 kids in the district this year, just they all went to Montessori schools. So it's possible we'll see some growth in our district. Also, I just think I took about another 150,000 off of that number that they originally put in. And I think the reasoning for that is because, like I said, the legislators just had a presentation that they're between two different economic forecasts. They're either $150 million short in their budget or they're $300 million short in their budget. That money has to come from somewhere. They have to balance the budget. I do not expect us to get the full amount that they're currently saying we're going to get. I'm hopeful. And I've told you, I've told CBT, me and David and Sheila and Will have talked about this. I think we can still discuss the possibility of what if that money does come through. But I'm also realistic and a bit hesitant about what that may look like. So there's about 300,000 in the state run that I've taken out of that number. And then additionally, I've taken the UPK number out of there for 3-year-olds, although I'm pretty optimistic that we could get that back. And like I said, that's about 150,000. So there's about $450,000 in revenue there that we're told we might get, but I'm not confident enough to put into our budget. So you can ask some questions about that in a second as well as we go through it. After we get through revenues, the next thing we do is we pull out all of our expenditures. This has been a task that is not easy, as I'm sure Sheila would tell you. And in truth, the only reason we were able to go through every line as well as we have this year is because Sheila's been able to support me and do some of the day-to-day things that I haven't had a chance to get to that normally would be something that we both are trying to accomplish or that just one of us is trying to accomplish. So it's opened me up this year to dive deep into the expenditures. I think we found some really good gains. There's a few things I want to highlight on the right side that's different than the left side. First of all, you're going to see an activities transfer there for $203,000. In the past, that's been listed as an expenditure because we have two different banks that we use for our activities fund versus our general fund. That's not how most districts do it. And so me and Sheila talked about this the other day. We feel pretty confident that we should change this to a transfer. Why this is important is in the budget, that was a line, it was a 1612 line item, which the code doesn't matter to you, but it was a admin contingency fund basically. And so when you look under admin purchase services, that was being inflated by all of our activities money coming out of that line. And so in reality, other schools, as we compared our budget to other districts, that wasn't in there. So this is where I think, as we've talked to other districts, as we've looked around the state, I think this is the better way to do it. And so it's going to change our admin purchase services line by about 203,000, but now we're going to do a transfer, and that's the cost of that. So that does not include your coaching stipends. That's the amount of money that actually goes into each of their line budgets for general activities, uniform budgets. Each sport, for example, soccer has a budget line item. So that's what covers that. So we'll be transferring that out of the general fund there. So that's one big piece to note. I think the food service transfers, we did not change that yet. We looked pretty deeply at food service, and in talking to Andrea, I think we need to increase her budget, but also the flip side of that is we don't think we're going to hit that mark this year. We don't think it's going to end up being 320,000. We think it's going to be quite a bit less than that we actually have to transfer. And so looking at the increase of about 50,000 that Andrea is looking at as food costs have gone up, I think that we can basically absorb that with the same transfer as we had this year, or the same projected transfer we had this year. The last two line items you're going to see there, the recurring cap transfers. The reason there's an increase there is because we looked at our interest that we are transferring, and that's going up. We've done a really good job. A lot of people, like I said, that have been involved in this, but we've got better interest rates this year on all of our accounts, and we're seeing a lot of gains on our revenue there. And so you've committed to transferring a chunk of that every year. So that's why you see your cap transfers going up. And then your one-time cap transfers, that's huge. You look at last year, we spent 959,000. This year we're projecting 216,000. And that 216,000, I know we were in the work session. That's changed from what the initial 206 ask, because the grant that's covering the vestibule, the safety vestibule here at Crest, is $10,000 short of what the actual bid is on that. So we're looking to do 10,000 more on that. We can dive into each of the expenditures. I'm pretty excited. If you look at the actual recurring expenditures, you'd have to add the activities in to get a really good comparison to last year. But this item includes all of the asks from the wish list, the operational wish list, the capital wish list. So all of the positions that have been recommended that you add, they're already in here. All of the steps and levels that you've already approved are in here. All of the insurance changes are in here. So this increase that we thought we were going to have in expenditures after we were able to dive in and find multiple things where, you know, next year Sheila's going to the grants position instead of having 2 people in the business manager line item, having people Service mentioned, you know, she has a teacher retiring. They're at the end of their career. We're hiring somebody at a entry level salary scale, and that's a huge savings. So we're seeing some big gains there, and I'm pretty excited about that. I was really excited because when I looked at the budget last year, about midway through the year, I was thinking there's a good chance we're going to have to let people go over the next year or two, or we're at least not going to be able to talk about additional money until at least 2 years down the road, maybe 3. I kind of shared those projections. And I think we've kind of come out of it. And if things come through the way the governor says they're going to come through, which we shall see, then we've kind of done well over a year to get to a point where we're actually pretty stable. So, and again, we can dive deeper into these. And if you want to look at the longer sheets that you have in front of you, you'll be able to see better breakdowns of each of those numbers. The operational wish list. This is something that you saw last month. It is obviously a topic that I think you'll probably want to discuss tonight based upon the conversation, but we're going to be asking you to approve the 4 positions on the top box that are at the bottom. So it would be the additional classified staff at SHS, the ELL teacher for the district, the permanent sub solution. We're not, here's the thing. We know we need more money in subs in the budget. We don't know if the permanent sub solution is the right solution currently. But if we put it in the budget and you approve the FTE, then we can at least start there. If we look back in 2 months and say we'd actually just put that money towards regular subs, we can do that on the amended budget. But since you only approved that FTE for 1 year, you would have to approve it again if we're going to offer that position. So I think we're asking you to approve that. It won't change the budget at all, but that way we have documentation of it. And then there's a sped para that ECC is going to be asking for. That's actually in the budget from this year, so that number is a little bit off, but we need to approve that 0.5 because it was only approved for 1 year. So really you're at it, where the ask is that you add 2 full FTEs and that you reapprove 1.5 FTEs from the past year. So that's to keep in mind. And then the bottom 2 boxes I think are important because it shows that we've absorbed a couple positions from grants. We actually are looking to eliminate 2 positions off of the general fund budget. And in doing so, we took that math interventionist and the counselor at Crest, took them off grants and absorbed them into the general fund. And again, that's already in the expenditures that you saw. The Spanish teacher there was public comments about that. So I imagine you'll want to have conversation about that. But that's what the additional classified staff is at the top. We would be looking to, my understanding is that we're looking to add a classified library aide for that position. So that is an additional FTE. By doing that, you are opening up 1 certified FTE who is currently serving as the librarian. And that would allow you to add a half FTE Spanish in the high school and a half FTE Spanish at the middle school. So you'd have a full Spanish teacher at both buildings. So you'd still have, it would not be a certified librarian position though. It would be a classified position. So after all of this, I think the question is, well, how are we stacking up so far this year? The cake is not totally built, but it is being stacked up. So I'm pretty excited about that. I want to re-look at these. Thank you, Sheila. Appreciate that. She got to see the cake this morning. It's pretty exciting. It's a very colorful cake. Again, if you look at the bottom, this is what you approved in the strategic financial plan. I want to keep pointing us back to that, at least as a starting point, because that's where I'm looking to build the budget off of. So where are we at this year? Staffing, we're investing 81.48%. The way the budget is built currently, yearly overhead, we're at 15.71%. You can see both of those are in the low range of the asks. One-time capital project overhead is only 1.11%. I think you've strategically pushed that this year to be lower because we're looking to find ways to cut. And so a lot of that is going towards our technology build out. And then our savings for future needs, that's the one area where we're on the high end of that 2 to 4%. But our total expenditures versus revenues right now, as of today, in this budget is 101.85%. I think that that's going to change. As I said, there's a couple positions today that I found out are less. So I think we're going to get closer. I also have some more lines to dive into on expenditures. I'm really hopeful we're going to hit 100%. I know we talked about that, Joe, at the last meeting that we had, and I'm really hopeful we're going to get close to 100%. And that's not counting the potential revenue that I think is out there. And I want to be transparent about that revenue. And I think there's some creative things that we can at least discuss with that revenue. So the next month, I'm going to be diving deeper and deeper into this, but I think we're really close to having a budget. So we do have some action items for you all, and then you can ask any questions you have. But we're going to be requesting approval of the additional 3.5 FTEs to the budget for this year off of the operational wish list. I believe that's one of the action items down on your agenda today. I'd like you to have some discussion about the budget and how it's being built within these parameters. Are you finding that helpful? Are you finding that not helpful? Is that something that you want me to continue going forward? I think this third bullet point, discussing the potential additional revenue streams. This is something that we know there's a chance we're going to get more money, right? It could be to the tune of about $450,000. I'm pretty skeptical about that. And I think you should be skeptical. That would be my recommendation. However, I also think that you can show some intent to help staffing understand where you would like to put some of that money should it be realized. And so the reason I think it's important, and as I've shared with both CBT and David, is, for example, if the interest of the staff and of the board was to put in a retention payment next year, you could do something like that by saying this is contingent upon this money coming in. The reason that's important is if it's not in the initial budget, it's not pair includable. So there's reasons you would want to talk about that money now versus in the fall when we actually have it. But I think you would want to put boundaries up around that money and say, we're willing to discuss it. We're willing to look at options, but we're not willing to release that unless it actually comes in. We're just running too tight around 100%. So I think that builds transparency. It builds you still being within the framework that you've built. You'd be at about 82.5% to staffing to 83% if you put that whole amount towards some type of staffing program. And I think CBT might have the ability to present you with an option. So I think you could at least consider that. And then in May, we'll be looking to approve basically the budget. But what we're looking really, as me and David talked about, is we're looking for you to approve the proportional allocations that we have. Is this correct? Are we putting the right amount of money to staff? Is the budget built in a way that you feel like you can defend within the community and you feel comfortable with? And then the last action item I have is get pumped, get excited. I'm excited. You can tell I wore a suit jacket tonight. I don't get more excited than that. I know, it's crazy, Will. It's crazy. I thought this was going to take 2 years to balance the budget. We were at 111% last year of expenditures over revenues. I didn't think there was any way we'd get there this year. I'm still not convinced that we'll get all the way there, but we're really close. And I think that's pretty exciting. I think we should all celebrate that. That's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work from Sheila. It's a ton of work from the other staff in the CAO, the admin office. The staff's been awesome to support us looking at every item and really supporting everything that we're trying to do. It's basically due to the increase in revenues and the decrease in expenditures. And I think we're going to really come close to 100%. On Friday, we were at 100%. Now we've had a few things change and we're at 101. I think we're going to get it back to 100. So continuing to look to get to there over the next couple weeks. And then I just wanted this last bullet point. It's really important to me. Two things we don't really want to risk next year. I mean, this is year one budget for me. So, okay, Aaron's attacking expenditures and going hard in the paint at expenditures here. And that's fine up until the point that what if I'm wrong about something? And so we want to still have some buffer. And I think that where you have that buffer right now is in your fund balance and in being conservative with the way you plan out your revenues. So I'm not looking deeply at diving into our unassigned fund balance at this point. I think being at the 400,000 to 600,000 you've all felt is a pretty comfortable starting place. And so I'm not looking at going any deeper into our unassigned fund balance by budgeting our expenditures over our revenue. And I'm not really looking to be more aggressive with what I think our revenue planning will be. But with this budget currently, we were able to do increase in insurance premiums. It's 11% to our staff. That's a huge deal. We were able to give steps and levels. That was a big request I know from staff over the past few years, is my understanding. We were able to accomplish that. We were looking at adding programming and retaining all of our positions while absorbing some of our grant funded positions into the general fund. I didn't think that was possible. So I'm super excited. I'd ask that you get excited. You don't have to show your excitement as much as I am, but you can get excited if you'd like to. So that's my presentation there. Happy to have questions and discussions from there. Can I sit down now so I don't have to hold this in front of my... Okay.
David, do you have anything more to add, or Sheila, Will, before we all jump in?
I think Sheila's already said it once, but we are very deeply appreciative. Aaron's jumped in and had a big learning curve, and he's done that. I appreciate Sheila supporting him and double checking numbers. Came in this afternoon. What you doing? Just checking Aaron's numbers. And they were all, which is exactly what we want, and all spot on. So I really appreciate the ability just to dig deep into expenditures more than we've had the capacity in the past. And I think that's what we were missing. Another area for us to gain. So I'm excited about that. So big thanks, but yeah, we can dig into whatever part you guys might want to, and we just didn't want to dig deep without an interest in it.
I would like to say yes to your question.
All right. Awesome.
Yes.
Since the operational wish list is an action item, are you
Yes.
asking questions about that now?
You can ask about it now or then, whichever one's easier.
Okay. I don't know if that was a specific question.
So I think the key thing is you're looking for another para at the high school.
Library aid. It's on a slightly different salary column.
Oh, okay. Library, excuse me. You're looking for that. And then you're looking to add an ELL teacher. And so those are your new ones. And then there's also that action to say, yeah, we got to allocate FTE kind of as per auditors. You guys have to make that vote. But the cost is not, there's not an additional cost for those things.
And currently, the middle school runs their library with the library aid,
Currently, the middle school runs 100% by a library aid, yes.
and that's been done for a long time.
It's 3 years. Yeah, it's 2.5 because everyone.
COVID.
So,
In 2020, when we COVID.
Before I left, for a couple of years before I left, so at least 4.
So it's been a long time.
Prior to that, it was.
and we've been running prior to that since the Great Recession when we had to make cuts. The high school, middle school has been one certified librarian, one library aid. And so this would just be going with library aid. I don't know if Jesse has anything he wants to add to that piece. It's a fairly common solution right now in high schools and schools. It's not an atypical thing. Elementary is a different story for sure.
Also have a library that's open and staffed available for our students, right?
That is correct. The library would still be open and be staffed. It may actually be open more just because the current situation has that person half teaching, half library. So we think we can actually get more minutes of open access to library with the transfers or the shuffling that Jesse's done.
And does the library aid, is that like a specific certification?
It is not. No, it is not. So
Can I ask, does the library, this is old school, I guess. Is it books and computers? And do they get support with the computers if it has computers in it? Or is it, like, what are their duties as a librarian, I guess? Yes, good, good. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
There also is a tech piece to it where the person in there manages its Chromebooks. Is there workstations again?
Okay. And do they get support with the technology from the, right?
Yes, we should.
Okay. Do they have any other duties, so to speak?
There's a lot of these, they manage textbooks for teachers. Libraries,
No.
Right. Well, yeah, it never has been, but just to
Yeah.
kind of get that. Okay. All right. Thanks, Jesse.
Welcome.
And from a Chromebook perspective, like Josh's team is managing all of the components tech wise. It's just, I mean, for lack of a better word, just check in, check out.
They do some basic technical support, which Jake, since Kate's went to a full-time teaching position at this point, Jake Paul has stepped in to help with some technical support with the Chromebooks, so has kind of absorbed that duty. With a classified employee in there next year, I anticipate them absorbing, that basic tech help where a kid for one reason or another can't log on to their Chromebook. They go to the library and help them log on.
On the Spanish piece, I did promise, I know Jody can't be here. I talked to Dr. Hill as well. Just to talk through that action item list so people are aware, because I know I told her I'd say that. Since it is a budget thing, can, like the high school and the middle school, continue to do less Spanish as we currently are, and invest those dollars into more salary, base pay, or steps somehow into benefits? And I think that would be her perspective, is that the sections are not so large, so we have to have another Spanish teacher. She would rather see those dollars go into base pay or something like that. So I want to make sure I said that out loud. I know that talking to Abigail, Jesse, and other people, they would, and I know Michelle would say, I need the position partly just to build the schedule so you can have enough electives and move all the pods around to make the show work. And particularly at the middle school, that also impacts things. They need another elective in that space. And so I know that there's multiple perspectives, but I wanted to make sure I did say that out loud to Dr. Pettit.
Well, isn't it fair to say from Renee Frizzie's public comment that as a Spanish teacher, although she doesn't want to see that librarian position lost, she is advocating for another Spanish teacher? That was what I heard.
Yeah, I think that's strong, and I would definitely advocate. I think you to live in Colorado, to grow up in Colorado, and not really be learning Spanish is not okay. So programmatically, I think it is an essential part of what we do for all students. And so I think expanding that, it's not like we're going robust or getting crazy by having a full Spanish teacher at the middle school. This isn't like somehow cutting edge or overachieving. And so I really firmly believe that all our kids getting more Spanish is essential, particularly living in Colorado. It's essential.
Do you know what percentage of middle schoolers are currently offered Spanish?
Oh, I can pull the numbers. I have them in my email.
Or maybe ballpark?
Um,
7th and 8th graders who take Spanish both years can get a high school credit for Spanish. They try not to stick kids in Spanish just for one of those, because then they have to repeat it. But if they had another, because I was there when we hired Renee, with the intent to start it in 7th and 8th grade and start going back to 6th and then back to 5th, so that you could get some exposure and some of that cultural piece in addition to the high school credit piece. So I don't know. David can look it up. I can look up the exact numbers, but
Yeah, I just know that
currently
50%
it's
of my
it's
kids
offered for 2 grades.
It's not all. It's about 50% of your 7th and 8th class. I also just want to add into that space. If we didn't go down this road, then Jesse's teams would have to look at taking their advanced kids and putting them into online Spanish. So part of my professional development here is I took the Spanish 2 course from CMC. You know, I've lived in South America, taught in South America. It's been 20 years, so my Spanish is rusty. I don't think any of our kids could pass a Spanish 2 course digitally online. That's one of the reasons I wanted to take it. It was supportive. I had a good instructor, but I wanted to personally go through that experience to say, would I ever sign one of our kids up for that? And I would not sign any of our kids up for that experience. I don't think they could learn it. You know, I have a doctorate degree. I've got tons of education, everything else, and that was, it was not a learning experience in that sense. So I wouldn't recommend that for any of our students in high school trying to fill in those advanced things. We'll also say it's nice. I don't know how the transfers will all go with the principals, but I know that Renee, through the concurrent enrollment expansion grant, we've been able to support her in getting all of her credentials so that she could teach concurrent enrollment if that's where she would get placed, and that's how, you know, the principals assigned her. That's been one of the things we invested in, was to have more of our staff be able to teach this concurrent enrollment, rather than trying to use what lots of rural communities have to do with their advanced kids and say, here's a computer, do it online. So that's another thing. I just want to make sure I did do that research here early in, you know, start of the year. So that was helpful for me to have that experiential moment.
So, David, if we get this position, what does it look like? So right now, Renee is half-time.
She's half-time at the middle school, and then she's half-time at the high school.
So I don't,
She's a full-time.
Yep.
And then we would hire another full-time person?
yep, we would look
How
for,
would that?
so what you would have is 2 full-time Spanish teachers at the high school and a full-time Spanish teacher at the middle school. And I'm not, you know, I'm not going to go into who's assigned where, because it's not what I do, but we would go immediately tomorrow morning and post. That will be a hard position, I think, to find. So we want to get after it. And the principals are anxious to do that. So, yep.
Yeah, I know I spoke to Jody and heard her comments for a while, and she doesn't think the data supports the need yet. But I know we've discussed as a board kind of the intentionality of expanding our Spanish programming. So, you know, I'm in favor of just from that thought process. But
It's good.
And with that said, not that this is the time for it, but I believe that learning a second language begins at a much, much younger age at the elementary level. So if that were ever to come around, that would be a possibility. I would feel very strongly that we start Spanish at a much younger age. Not for now.
I'd fully support that. We definitely have to have more teachers in Longfellow be bilingual or functional Spanish at that level to do that. That also gets to, so that's those who are native English speakers learning Spanish. The other one is that increase in people who do not speak English, right? So the opposite side of the spectrum, they speak Spanish, but also remember many of those students don't know how to read and write Spanish, don't have schooling. And so there's multiple layers I just want to name. So that's your ELL. We're always using different acronyms in that world, so always feel free to ask. But we need one more staff member to support those kids, because otherwise what can happen is that teacher might have 25 kids, but one kid who can't understand everything can take up all of their energy, and the other 24 don't get enough attention. So it's the strategy of trying to add supports to help those teachers be able to manage that one kid who has really high needs or high intensity minute needs, and to try and support those classrooms where those things are happening, so that that teacher can continue to spread their attention across all the kids, and not really be trying to pick up the speed with one person who's so far out of it.
So this Spanish position is going to also be part-time district level helping with our Spanish teachers?
that's
Or you're talking about
a
a
secondary FTE ask.
Okay, but that's not on.
It is.
Yeah.
Yep. You'll say
Oh,
ELL
that's
instructor.
ELL,
Yep.
sorry.
That one's actually costs more money. So we highly recommend it. We have one person who's an amazing liaison. We'll be looking for somebody who has more training and just direct instruction. And the principals have kind of set that schedule where the person would probably be at one building per day moving around, not only so they can work with those kids, but also work with those teachers when they have prep periods and trying to help the teachers expand their skill set or have some sort of coping mechanisms for a kid who is struggling in the classroom.
Yeah, the additional Spanish hire is not on here because the additional classified staff would free up that FTE to
You'll see it in the
reassign.
transfers
Yeah, I see
bucket.
it, I see it. I had a number of that.
David, too, just if I could say something about that too, because I know it's a public document. This is not, the operational wish list is not like an official document. You'll see that it actually said board approved on all 4 of those positions today. That was just to give you an idea of, okay, we approved these last month. These are asked for this month. I didn't want that to be something where everyone felt like, oh, they've already said they're going to approve it. Something along those lines. And then one more thing that I didn't bring up in the budget, just since I got a second really fast. Another piece that we're going to have to really develop a strategy around is the cash flow situation. I know we discussed that with our work session in the HEA discussion, but we have completely paid off the cash flow loan this year. We're not anticipating needing to borrow anymore. It was about 1.6 million. Super excited to get that done because they don't need any more documentation from me this year. So pretty excited about that. But I think we've spent down, as you can see, about 1.6 million of our fund balance projected. And so we're going to need to borrow more next year. So I'm thinking probably around 3 million next year at least. And so we need to come up with some strategy because I don't know how sustainable that is long-term with the state treasurer's office as well with the increased need across the state for that. So we'll have to keep our eyes closely on that.
So any budget-related questions before I start asking some non-related to the operational list? So our total projected unassigned grew. It's a good problem to have, but still, I'm not going to say it's a problem, but I can understand a few things. And for all of you, I was in here last week doing agenda review, and we had some of this discussion, which, probably appropriate that we budget that every staff member takes all of our benefits, but that's not the reality. So there's those kind of built-in savings, if you will. I don't know how you can budget versus that, but Aaron, Sheila, is there anything that, I was definitely expecting closer to zero, and we're not at zero, which is a good feeling, but just anything that's bigger ticket items, so to speak, that caused the increase while you were diving through line by line?
I mean, so it did increase. You're right. And it's, if you look at the fiscal year 24-25 budget, the top line, I think, is what you're kind of referring to there, Joe. We had that initially at about 3.6 million. It's up to about 3.8. That is our best estimate currently. If we take all of our expenditures, our year-to-date expenditures, our encumbrances, and try to get an idea of how much we think the audit will be different. In terms of big ticket items, yeah, insurance is a big one, right? You budget it for everybody, and that's going to be one that not everybody takes. So that's definitely one area. Sheila did some of the work on that as well. So because it's her budget.
2 of the large items were my salary was in the initial budget whenever Aaron presented to CBT for next fiscal year. So that's going away because we still have the FTE that you guys approved for the grants fiscal. So you're dropping that. And then we have the unfilled SPED teacher at early childhood that the district funds for 70,000 plus benefits. So those were 2 of the big ticket items that caused your fund balance, beginning fund balance for fiscal year 24-25 to go up.
And one other area that we've addressed on the new budget is I had mentioned that we looked at the admin cost and that a big chunk of that money was activities transfers, and it just was not being done. I don't want to say that like that makes it sound like you weren't doing it correctly. That's how it's done when you have multiple banks. So I hope that doesn't come across that way. But in talking to other districts and looking at it, it makes our admin line look big. And so we pulled that out. But in doing that, also met with David this week as we were looking at the budget and looking at the contingency fund. There's a contingency item in there for multiple things that have happened over the past few years. And David was able to look at that item and say, hey, doesn't look like that's been spent over the past 5 years to the point it is. And I think we have some money left in that, I think, this year still. And so we were able to kind of decrease that line item in the budget for next year. And I think that that's one of the areas where we're going to see that we don't spend the full budget amount this year. And that's probably going to end up in the fund balance growing.
And then you said in the activities transfer, that does not have coaching stipends.
No, that is just they basically make a request for all the things that they pay directly out of their bank account, and that's the amount that we contribute to that.
So for those of us that have an interest in making sure we're funding that appropriately, we could see that more clearly. But as we've talked about with some of the coach training and retention, attraction of coaches, all the things, and getting better people, we wouldn't see that there. We would see potentially paying more, and that's flowing for somewhere else.
Yeah, you'd see that in. It's not going to show up on the long sheet, but I could. Well, actually, I think it is. No, it's not. Yeah, but I can get you the actual. I think it's under central support or something along those lines in the long sheet. But I can get you the exact amount on all those stipends. I've been diving into that. I think next year we've budgeted about 270,000 for all the stipends, and that actually includes an increase slightly because we're adding a couple positions that were not on the coaching salary schedule. In activities, for example, drama is one that we're looking to add people onto the actual salary schedule, and so that includes that. But that's going to be in a different category. This transfer doesn't include that, but it will. I can get you that number just to give you an idea of the magnitude for it. When we did steps, when you approved steps, about 10,000 of that goes to giving coaches a step. So out of the 179,000, that's about 10,000 goes to your coaches, and that actually ends up being less because coaches cycle through more regularly than other staff members. But that's the biggest risk that you have. It gives you a magnitude of it.
Yeah. Well, I know that they are all intertwined in how we do things, but like I said, I know it's been an interest. We've talked about it with some of the development, coaching, whatever you want to call it, for those coaches that we hire. So, but that may require some additional pay, and I don't know budget implications exactly, but if we can dive into that more, it may not be at 25, whatever. I don't even know when the year we're in, 24, 25, and maybe at 25, 26, but it'd be nice to see where we can make some gains there.
Absolutely.
If there is a recommendation like two board members have or something want to come and bring that to Aaron and I, we'd be glad to get an idea of what that ask is, because I'm not sure exactly what that. I understand the interest, but if there's like an actual ask there, then we can start to do design work so we at least be ready for next fiscal year to.
I don't know if I have it yet either. But.
Okay. Maybe you have questions or some at least two board members want to come and have that conversation. We'd be glad to sit down and go, okay, we're understanding.
And Marco has done various presentations.
Mm-hmm.
So where does that kind of stand with him still having an interest in looking to add within? Is that isn't showing up anywhere? Is that just faulty right now?
Yeah, I mean, his requests. So I met with like I said, I met with each manager, and his biggest requests for next year were adding. So we currently pay 2 drama stipends, but they're not on the coaching pay, and I think that's one area that we really felt like they do a lot of the same work. They're committed to the same time, basically, as coaches, and we felt like that was important to move them onto that salary schedule. Additionally, they've been having a third person that hasn't been paid for many years, so I've put a third one into that budget line. That was his biggest ask for next year, as well as putting a budget line item in there like you do for every other activity. And so that's already been put in there. Also, mountain biking has been a club with the district for a long time. Their coaches have not been paid the same way that other coaches are in the district. They are now an official school sport. They're not a CHASA sport, but they are an official Salida school sport. And so one of his strong asks was to add those positions to that salary schedule as well. So that's in there. His other requests, there's a couple other coaching positions that I just didn't feel like we had the ability to hit every ask this year, and specifically in the middle school that he'll be looking for next year, but he didn't ask for any more sports as of this year at this point. So I think we honored his biggest requests and are funneling as much money as we can into activities at this point.
So we had a great public comment from a student at the middle school regarding access to playgrounds. And I don't know if you guys have had any thoughts or budget thoughts. I'm assuming you saw that presentation from her a few weeks ago, and seemed like a pretty minor in terms of an overall budget. I know, but it does seem like a big issue when you have kids that don't have access to same equipment as others. I don't know if there's grant. Sounds like there's probably grants you can find for a lot of those things. It would be great if we could look into that and see if there's any.
Yeah, we got the presentation, I think, yesterday, just so you're
Okay.
aware. But I think between now and the May budget, we can look at that and we might come back and say, here's a capital project, but there's a lot of, you have to dig in and see what the analysis is and see what those things
Right.
are. It sounds like she had some ideas, but maybe she has some other starting points or something else. But right now, no analysis has been done, so I think we would start at that place. That is also why we've looked at like the elementary school, trying like the kindergarten space, trying to adjust some of those, same sort of thing. So we've taken some bites out of that concept, but we can look deeper between now and May.
Okay, thanks.
That would come up as a capital project increase from
Mhm.
what is it, 216 add on whatever that piece is to that space.
Yeah, I would say for me, here's my 4 points. My 4 asks for May would be some allocation. We may not have an answer, but if there's room and we think there's room, maybe there's an allocation of funds so we can work on that problem throughout
Okay.
the year, because it is short notice to get it done now. I understand that, but probably could have an appropriate allocation to work on that and maybe do it next year or time permits, however those things flow. Um, I do think that building in a retention payment would be appropriate. I would look to you both for 3 to 5%. I don't know what the magic number is, but I also think that we have a financial plan that we all kind of agreed upon. And if we get, call it $1 million more, we should be giving out 80 to 85% of that in salary and things of that nature. So um, I think, but building it in allows it to be paid, assuming we have the money. I think the messaging needs to be very clear that just because it's there doesn't mean it's going to be paid. That's always how it's been, but it also always was paid. So it just needs to be very clear that it may be 5%, but you only get 3 because it's all going to depend on student count and the audit. And then I know some of this jumps into the next discussion, but we've talked about people leaving the district for whatever reason and coming back and they're at 7 or whatever year it is. So what's the increase to 15 or whatever David would recommend and us approve, and building that kind of number into the budget. And then also, I think we talked a little bit of, do we cap out our classified staff? And if we are able, if we do, I don't know what that level is. I don't know where any of those people are, but to be able to say, no, our classified people will continue to get steps and levels and not going to get capped out at whatever number it is. To just be able to build that kind of into the budget going forward, if it all makes sense.
Yeah, and Joe, actually, so a follow up to this, because Jody and Ben aren't here, is I'll be sending out a video kind of presentation as well, so that they get the same material you're getting tomorrow to all of you, as well as a little bit more of a narrative on some other things that have been happening, like my normal report. With that, one of the things David asked me to send out was CBT asked specifically on costs on a few different items, and I want to get that information to you as well. I was able to present that to CBT on Friday. And both the capping out the classified and what's the increase to go to 15 years, we have a pretty solid number on both of those now. So I'll be able to get that to both you and CBT as well. But that'll be coming tomorrow for sure. So.
Can I follow up on that? Because I'd love to hear some other board comments. It helps me when I go back to the bargaining team and trying to think through, right? Say there's $350,000 that comes in additional revenue, right? We've gone after expenditures because we have the most control over that. We have less control over revenue, particularly predicting that. So let's say there's a $350 swing. Is there a strong interest? I think I can share the numbers. It's about $16,000 recurring dollars to unfreeze classified so that you could continue to get those 25 cents. It is a small in number of people that would be impacted by that. People have been here for more than 16 years. That's why it's a smaller number. So that is one thing. I hear Joe saying I have an interest in making that happen in this current budget, right? Like build it in right here in the May. Do other people have a similar piece? Because that informs me when I go back to the bargaining team of making sure I get that interest in front of people.
I have that interest. I definitely like the idea of the coming in at 15 and remedying that for people that we can.
Okay.
And for the financial work did. Yeah, and the retention payment, if possible, also sounds nice.
Okay. So on the, so that's the unfreezing classified so they could continue to go. And then placement when people are hired, which also has a grandfather clause, because in 2012, 2008, we went to 15. I think Sheila, correct me if I don't get the history right. 2012, we went back down to 7 years when somebody transfers in and placing them. So we looked then, and Sheila was actually able to do the hard data dive, pulled every personnel file who was hired from 2012 on, and has looked at every single person who could have potentially gotten more credit when looking at their personnel file. So we believe that's a $75,000 cost, which is fairly affordable, and that would then just put everyone who comes in at 15 years of possible experience to transfer, and take care of the people who were hired from 2012 on. So inside of those parameters, there's that size of a number. So here, Jen and also Joe or other people have similar.
And that includes no back pay.
Correct. Yeah, I was just getting ready to clarify it.
Thank
So
you.
what there's two things that would do. That would not include back pay from when they were hired. It's getting them. So if they were hired at 7 and they should have been given 15, it's adding 8 steps to where they're at. It's not adding all the way to if they felt like they should have been hired at 20 because they had 20 years of credit. It's still just getting them the difference between 7 and 8 this year. It's no back pay along the way. That'd be a huge number to go back and dig up every single year that you didn't pay those steps. But it's at the same time, just to do that is 72K. 75, I'm sorry.
75.
Yeah.
Right.
So if
Yes.
they were hired at 7 4 years ago, then we would just put them at 15.
You do 7 plus 4. It depends how much experience they came in. They might have they taught for 1 year in DPS and they came here, or they taught for 7 years in DPS. So those people wouldn't have any impact. They taught for 10 years of DPS. Well, there's 3 years who might be able to give them additional credit by just replacing them and from going forward, paying them on that new step.
Well, and to clarify though, to your point though, Mandy, too, and I think it's important because there's a lot of confusion. We sent out a survey saying how many people would this impact. Then Sheila was able to do a deep dive. But if somebody was hired 4 years ago at 7, they'd have been hired at 7. Now they would be 11 because they've gotten 4 steps since. We give them an additional 4 steps to get them to 15 because they should have been at 11 to start and then gotten 4 steps. So that's where I want to make sure it's as clear as we possibly can, because I do know there's quite a few staff members who've approached us this week and asked us, what exactly would that look like? And I think that it's still unclear, but that would be what the difference would be.
And then moving forward, if they're coming to us with less than 15 years experience,
They would just be
then
placed
they
at.
just get placed at 15. So it's only people who are 15 plus who would go.
Yeah.
So if you had 20, you go to 15.
You'd go to 15 if you're
Instead of
transferring out of DPS again, to use that example.
But if you have 10, you get to go to 10 instead of 7.
Correct. It's really easy going forward. It's just that interim, and we've done the study now. So if, and there's a lot more details we'd have to lay out on a piece of paper, and then we'd have to have an application period and publish who we think it affects, how we think it affects, give people an appeal period. I mean, there's a process you'd have to go through to.
So essentially, all those staff would just get kind of a one-time check. Well, they wouldn't. But
They get a one-time replacement, which would change their salary. They'd have a bump to their
So
salary.
moving forward, they'll have a big increase in their paycheck from what they were doing
Right.
previously, but they're not going to get an additional bonus.
No.
Yeah, and I would think clearly legal involved in whatever that agreement may be, because
Yes.
I do not want you to say 9 and you to say 9 and they to say 10 and we have a squabble.
No, that's why we'd have to set up a clear process and clarity and let everyone have their voice and make sure there's a way to clarify that.
But that's not a negotiable thing, right? Let's say the district.
Is in part of negotiated policy, and that's our next conversation. I believe it's in GCBARN.
And I think the other piece that's important is some of the interest from staff as well. We're looking at adjusting salary schedules to different, like $1,000 steps, 50-cent steps for classified. Those were some interest they shared. And one of the things that we also said is if you change to 15 years and change steps, that's going to alter that number pretty substantially because it gets exponentially bigger as you go. So just to highlight it, like that's an interest that was shared with us. And I think it's one that if you do that first and then you adjust to 15 years, it's going to be much bigger than that number that you're seeing currently.
So currently, this like 75K and the 16K to increase the classified is not built into the current budget. We just
Not currently because they're both negotiated to some extent. Yeah.
And that's why I was curious what you guys, if you had an interest in that, how would we find those dollars? We would go up against and get more aggressive on those revenues. So Aaron's identified about $350 to $450,000 UPK. I'm just going to label them for you. Each of them about 150 UPK because of 3-year-olds. There's a big question mark there. Student count. We're going to build the budget on 0, and you have the background data from Jim Sampson's from April to May that really supports 0 is probably the best number for budget planning. And then you also have, will all the revenue come from the State House as it is predicted today? So if you pick those 3 and you say, well, I want it in this budget, those 2 items, for instance, we would have to put those up against and get more aggressive on those revenue streams. That's how we would do that piece.
Just to go back a little, when you went and researched how many people were affected by this since 2012,
2012.
what was that number?
There were 27 people total that were placed on a step 7. Some of them stayed at 7. Some of them there was given a step that year, so they moved to 8 their first year. Out of the 27 people, there were 4 people that were frozen on the BA columns. And then go down for me. The total cost, there were 114 steps. And then you subtract out the 4 people that were frozen. So that was 19 steps. So you take the 95 steps that are remaining times the $639 and then add benefits to it is how I came up with the 75,000. So what I did was I went through, how many people? 75 employee files. And I got what column and what step they were hired on. I went through all of their information as far as the hiring documents that we require and saw what their teaching experience was at the time. So if their teaching experience was 14 years and we hired them at 8, they would get 6 steps added to their current placement. Now, your BA people would still get the steps, even though it doesn't cost the district anything, but then they would have the opportunity for the horizontal move. So they all have that opportunity to take classes and be able to move horizontally. And if they move far enough horizontally, then they would start getting money.
And can I ask, is there any reason to believe that like a CBT into this? Or?
I'm not sure. Aaron presented all this information and they were not ready to discuss their financial interest at that time.
Yeah, I mean, so I can give you 2 pieces of information. They asked for about the cost of about 7 things, 6 or 7 things. And you'll get that tomorrow, exactly what they asked for and what our analysis was of them. So the cost of changing steps, there was $1,000 steps, dollar steps for classified, 50-cent steps for classified. There was the 15-year piece, the unfreezing everybody, both unclassified and uncertified. I think those were the 6. There might be one more, but I'm doing it off a bit of memory here. So that was the interest that they expressed initially. We gave them the costs on that, and it had been a long morning, to be fair. We had gone through a long budget presentation, and they felt like they weren't ready to discuss their priorities at that point. And so they wanted to come back to the next meeting ready to discuss those.
When you say unfreezing everybody.
Yeah, so there's one of the asks was to basically unfreeze the entire salary schedule. And so for certified, for example, BA plus nothing freezes at step 4, well, 3 to 4. And so the idea would be you just add steps all the way to the bottom. So you add that $639 step all the way to the bottom of the BA column. Then you would take BA plus 8 freezes at step 7. You do that all the way to the bottom. There's quite a few people frozen on specifically those 2 columns. Out of I think I told you at the last board meeting, it was like 24 people that I thought were frozen. I think it's 27 that 26 that are actually frozen.
Is this frozen as in could unfreeze by getting further education? Not just like randomly.
Many of them. There's only 2 people who are currently deep into the steps that are frozen on the bottom of it and also stuck between BA 56 and masters. And it's late enough in the career where they're thinking probably not worth pursuing my master's at this point. And so those people are kind of frozen. They're actually frozen where they cannot move horizontally along the scale. Everyone else is currently in a position where they could at least move horizontally. However, because if you're a BA, just example, we have some people that are like BA plus nothing, step 20. If they move horizontally, they're still frozen, although their base pay would go up and they would have got more steps along the way. So they'd make more money in that column, but they're still frozen in that column because they're past the freeze point. So, yeah.
That national certification you talked about, David, for teachers, does that factor into steps, or is that just an additional?
We put it
payment
into one of the policies. I recommended it. Some people on the bargaining team didn't seem to be in support of putting more money towards somebody who's nationally board certified, or we're asking harder questions of that. I think it's something I would advocate for. Of we have one person who is nationally board certified at this time on our staff. We have another person who was, but let that lapse because it does cost money to maintain that in time and energy, maintain that, and there hasn't been a financial benefit for them. So it's a very small. But when you look at, like, I'll take a Boulder Valley. I think when Will and I looked at it, it was like almost 60% of the staff, and there's a large financial input. If I look at like CEAs, the association's main state website, they're in full support of state board certification. I would be full support of state board certification. That would be an additional way for somebody outside of formal education to gain more money on top of their salary schedule. And so we put something in play and as a suggestion for people to consider, but right now it hasn't moved forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fully in support of, trying to find creative ways to unfreeze but at some point there needs to be some professional development on the teacher's end as well, and some recognition that, hey, there is an opportunity for me to earn more money. I just need to further my career a little bit. It's not that, everyone should just come in and, not do any career development for their entire career and expect to be continually increased.
And I think our next conversation gets right to that. One of the policies I've included in your packets tonight to discuss looks at those things. Also to say, are we reimbursing those who go to a higher education class? It's at $45 a credit hour. Is that really the right number? Should we be increasing that? I think we can. We may not be able to make massive changes to base pay, but is there ways for us to support those people who are challenging themselves and growing? And I'd love to see us do this thing. So that's on the table, but I haven't got any feedback yet from CBT of they would like that.
That would be more of a stipend.
One's reimbursement, one would be a stipend, some things like that.
I mean, I'm a little concerned with the revenue side of things. Seems a little bit uncertain per usual, but we're already at 101 point, whatever it was, 102%, I'll just call it, over budget. If that revenue drops by 300,000 or 400,000, we're quickly up to 106 over budget. So, and then if the revenue is going down and we're adding more stuff to our expenses, then we're back up to this 111, which you're so excited about getting away from, Aaron. I personally would like to stick as close to 100 as possible.
When we get the information that you're going to send us tomorrow, will you have the costs with that also?
Yeah, I'll have the costs in that. And Matt, I would agree with that. That's something that I feel like we budgeted conservatively in the sense that we looked at those 450,000 and said, there's no guarantees here at all on this money. And I'm not willing to put our expenditures up against that with any certainty. So a big part of why I said what I said about the reason we would discuss it, I think you could look at any of these options. I think the bargaining team could come back and say, we have a strong interest in unfreezing people at 16,000. We recognize that it's not in the current revenue stream. If that revenue comes in instead of a retention payment, we'd like to go that route instead. And that's fine. But I think it's important to discuss it now, because if they would rather look at a retention payment and we don't get that in this budget as an option, even if it's an option that we don't pay, then it can't be parent includable. So there's some reasons to at least discuss it and think about it. And CBT, I think their interests, they could have different opinions on what they think is valuable and not. And that's fair. But I feel the same way. Honestly, I'm trying to get to 100%. I'm not trying to get much worse than that without having this buffer of this is only payable if this comes in. And so that would be these things to me that we'd be discussing. But I also think it's helpful for you all to share intent. Like you've all shared with me multiple times, the money does come in. We want to give our staff as much as we can. And so I think you can build it in a way that encompasses that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But and I'm continuing to pursue expenditures, and I do think we're going to get closer to 100 instead of 102 with the current revenue predictions. So there's a couple more. Like I said, today we had 2 teachers that changed, and that comes out to about 25K, and that's one day.
Right.
And so there's a few more things that I think we can find along the way.
Well, and the retention payments would just deal with the current monies that we know that we have. Like changing to the 15 years and unfreeze and classified, we have to be pretty confident that we have that money moving forward.
Yeah, you'd be making a commitment to those changes.
So when like PK and state money comes in, do you think there'll be more clarity on if this is the normal for the coming years, or like are they going to figure out UPK and then we can plan on that money moving forward, or it'll still be in flux for the next few years? In which
It's a
case,
tough
this
one,
would
but
be a harder decision to make because it's not as guaranteed.
Unless you go into a situation where you have declining enrollment, right? If you go into that situation, different answer. As long as you're flat or increasing enrollment, which is every prediction we have right now, then just time will be on your side to recoup some of those costs, right? Because they're going to put a little bit, it may not be a lot some years, maybe it is, but they'll put a little more into that per pupil funding. You'll gain a little bit more here and there. And so time helps you catch up as a government agency in that sense. If you stay on flat or increasing enrollment. So this
It
case.
feels really worrisome. You know, I feel like some people are very excited about this budget stabilization thing, maybe not happening this year or being a thing in the past, but then we could never really count on that, even if it didn't happen, or if it happened in a good way this year. There's no saying that wouldn't happen again next year with a full moon, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't want to speak to the legislator or to Governor Polis's thought process, but at this point, if they put the BS factor back in as a BS factor, I think that would be catastrophic for some of the promises that they've made politically. And I think it would be a struggle for their careers. But that being said, there's no reason to say we can't find another way to take away that money. And so I think it's very likely that you will see some different form of the BS factor that is not the BS factor.
Yeah, like I want to get excited about it, but it just feels in no like there's some party to feel.
Not until I see that the state has balanced their budget, right? Until I see that, I can't get behind it. Yeah, I mean, especially because we're legally required to in the state. I mean, and that was a huge part of the reason why they were looking to pass Prop HH last year, is because it allowed them to kind of supersede Tabor, and then maybe you don't have these shortfalls. But currently, the voters have said no to that. So I don't think we're going to get the full amount. But that's where I've tried to pull 150 out of it and say, this is my best guess at how much I think we're not going to get out of your initial budget here. And not initial, this is like their 5th run, I think.
So I guess just, you'd ask like our intent. My intent would be, we have a budget that's pretty close to 100. If extra money comes in, I would be for allocating that to staff in whatever way we feel like is sustainable moving forward. So with that said, is CBT, with all the things they asked you for before the May meeting, are they going to have their sort of top asks of, like, if this 450 comes in?
We
would
are
wanna move in
expecting
these
it to be so.
directions?
We would expect it to be so. I know they've asked to switch to spring bargaining, so I would expect that.
So we would expect by May all the things they've asked you for, that they would be able to give us some sort of breakdown of what they would.
Yeah. I think this conversation is really helpful because it allows Aaron and I to go back and say, no, the board's feeling very strong of stay close to 100. And what I'm hearing is the board's fine if that money shows up to allocate it. When I would recommend that highly, because we're covering all of our programmatic costs. And this isn't like we haven't given, this is covering all of insurance, giving steps. Like, there's been a lot of amazing stuff we've already been able to do. But if additional monies would come on this fiscal year, it's not like it'd be, oh, we've got to put it towards this program before we could put it into some sort of salary solution. I would say give it to the salaries as if it shows up to whatever degree it shows up.
And I think, David, really quick, I think my recommendation, if they ask my recommendation, or if you all ask my recommendation, you're not, and I'm still going to tell it to you. I think, I think I'd recommend putting it in a retention payment at this point, with the understanding that if it comes in, we pay it. But the reason I say that is because it gives you the most options. as a staff and as a district to where they could come back and say, that's not our priority. And we can discuss that now. And I think we can even look at the options now and understand the priorities, but we can't go backwards on a retention payment. We can go backwards on some of these other things. If we don't put the retention payment in, we can't have a retention payment that's going to be para-includable. We can do a bonus still, but it can't be para-includable at that point. And that is an interest that I've heard consistently with retention payments is they want para-includable chunks of that. And I think that that's important. So that would be my recommendation. Now, if they come back and say we have a much higher interest in this and not in retention payments, then I'm for allocating it in some other way. I mean, you could put it in a contingency fund and say this contingency fund is only allowable if this money comes in, then we can look at putting it in these things. So I'm open to that, certainly. But my recommendation would be look at putting it in this type of the retention payment so you don't have to backtrack if that's what you truly want later on. If there's zero interest from that from CBT though, then that's a different story. So
Well, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, is having the retention payment and making it para-includable safer than paying it in another way, as in steps and levels, in case next year the budget stabilization nightmare happens or this rural funding issue doesn't go the right way?
yeah, I mean, at that point, it's not recurring money. I agree with David, though. On the one hand, yes, it's not recurring money, so it's safer for the district. I do agree with David, though, that I think you're kind of always going to see, as long as you don't decrease enrollment, you're going to always see a little bit more money slowly over inflation. And so I think if we see that money coming in, I think in general, we can count on at least close to that coming in the next year as well.
Yeah, and I was going to say the same, more or less the same thing in terms of getting CBT's input of what their priorities are. Obviously, I think we all look at it and like the retention payment seems great because it benefits all staff equitably. But CBT comes back and they want to see X and not Y. I would probably listen to that. Assuming the dollars are equal. It seems like there's some things we can do around the margins, like with the unfreezing the classified. Seems like a relatively small dollar item. Unfreezing, correcting some of the steps. If that's an interest CBT expresses. It doesn't sound like they want to consider that, but it seems like that's something that could be built into recurring that wouldn't break the budget. But increasing the steps, a dramatic amount, things like that are just become exponential. That seems to be a lot harder ask in terms of where our budget's at.
I would agree that I'm interested in listening to that, but I don't have a high level of interest in things that are not equitable for staff that might not be represented or feel representing the CBT. Just my personal.
Well, the one other
opinion.
comment I was going to make that kind of goes along with that is in public comment, it was specifically stated prioritize money to staff that's working directly with kids. So I was a little unclear if that meant that there is an interest in supporting classified staff further. So that would be a question I would kind of want to hear from CBT directly, like by saying prioritizing money to staff working with kids, does that mean there is not an interest in unfreezing classified?
Yeah, I don't enjoy the way that sounds for many employees, and I hope I just misunderstood that. So that would be nice to get some clarity on.
I would like clarity on that.
I'll get some clarity on that.
Yeah, and I would say the retention payment to me was a really nice way to manage the budget and equitably pay everybody. The fact that CBT negotiated that out, but then still came back at that time of year when they're asking where's this bonus / retention payment, makes me struggle to fully take in what they're going to provide to us because I don't. It's just difficult when we have these conversations and that was their ask, and then they still asked for the retention payment even though they asked to take it out. So I struggle with those conversations when we're navigating these conversations.
And I want to be clear too, when I'm saying that the retention payment sounds great, I'm not saying in lieu of steps and levels. In addition to, obviously, which those are budgeted for.
I would just add a couple of things, and because I think it's probably time to shift to the next conversation because there are overlaps. I think we've got enough clarity for Aaron. Again, thanks to Aaron. I think this financial plan helps us. I think we've been playing around to say, hey, board, you gave us direction, stay within these proportional categories. This budget stays within those proportional categories. And so now it's a question of this. We talk about, I'm going to give 4 different buckets. Cash flow is one. That's not what we're talking about here. You have expenditures, revenues, and fund balance. Right? Fund balance doesn't mean that's how much cash you have. It's the difference. It's almost more of accounting. So that being said, we went after expenditures hard, which I think is the right thing. And I'm excited about that because we have the most control over that piece. We've got now the questions identified around revenue. So I think we're in the best place we can be going into the end of the legislative session. About 4 weeks left, a little less. And so we'll see what happens on those revenues, and everyone's aware of those things. I like that we're all openly saying, let's get that solutions towards staff if that money comes in. And of course, your other one is going to be post audit, right? How close were your actuals to your budget? And we'll know that late fall. And that also informs us how aggressive we can get leaning into some of those revenues. If you have a really strong fund balance, then it allows you to be more aggressive into those revenues than if you don't have a strong fund balance. So we'll know that later on. Last thing is, I'm really excited because what we're talking about is we took care of insurance. I didn't think that was going to be possible. We got steps and levels. That's fabulous. And now we're talking about more. I'm pretty excited about that because that was not what I was understanding. It was not the way I was seeing the picture developing. So this is about 1.5 years, maybe ahead of what we expected in the ship righted. So thanks to everybody who's involved in that piece. It's just very exciting to me to be able to be back. And again, I think our systems post-pandemic are back to proactive, back online, and I'm very excited to be able to keep chasing salary because we know cost of living is just obnoxious if you're a worker in this town. And so we got to stay after it. And I think we're in a good spot to stay after it. So I'm pretty excited moving into this budget kind of finalization stage. So.
Okay. Take 5 to 10, and then we'll come back for next discussion item. All right, team, welcome back. Starting discussion item number 2, negotiated leave policies. Dr. Blackburn, the floor is yours. And you're passing something out.
It's always hard when you have negotiations on Friday, turn around, trying to report about. But this is kind of what I sent you guys in my board report. But I made it into a packet. Took me some time trying to think through. Obviously, it's really broad, but I need to make sure there's some public comment from you guys of any points of clarity. So there's some spaces that I've highlighted. I made a tracker sheet like I did in the fall, which seemed to work for everyone, to show the back and forth. So we're looking at the third column. Coming out of this meeting, I want to make sure that I can fill out the third column and go back to the bargaining team. We got some work sessions set up over the next 2 Wednesdays on policy to try and get this. So I want to go through that. And obviously, if there's something I haven't highlighted, you're like, hey, David, I'd like to go back to this policy and make sure I'm clear that I have a firm line. That's what I'm looking for, right? Like, David, don't bring back a solution that misses this thing, whatever that thing is, right? So it's an opportunity for you guys to say publicly. So I've labeled those, the pink group of policies, which honestly, that's probably Aaron and I's number one priority to get those cleaned up. And I think we have those. There are 2, number 3 and number 4. So teaching load, which is policy GCL-N, non-teaching duties, which is GCMD-N. There are 2 questions there. I think everyone's on board. Teaching load, there's some question of whether or not we should identify directly how many minutes a teacher is given for prep. That seemed logical to me until last year. I had to provide a memo and realize, wow, the early childhood center has a schedule that's totally different from the high school, the middle school. So I provided the memo I gave last year, which is basically saying they have a span over a whole week. So it gave people flexibility, but it ensured also a minimum piece. That is poignant at some place like the high school who got into that clarity of what is my time on a 4-block system, right? That was one of the things I'd clean up because the full 100 minutes isn't all your personal prep time when someone in the elementary school has half of that or whatever the right proportional percentage is. And so it went from this is your time and the other half is principal directed time to allow them for collaboration, MTSS, or working on how to help a kid or curriculum, all those things. So I'm okay with working with the lawyer and trying to make sure, not necessarily, maybe we give some parameters what it is, but leave that kind of flexible so everyone gets a prep period and leave for same is not always equal. Sometimes fair is what everyone needs. I just want to make sure nobody on the board here is like, no, David, I want you to label it 52 minutes. Because if we label it 52 minutes, then I got to go to every principal and say, let me see your schedule and make sure everyone's got, and it would be a nightmare from my perspective, but I wanted to slow down and see if board members had a firm opinion on that.
I would say whether it's you or building leaders in their advisement, managing that to a minute seems excessive versus each building's a little different. Here's kind of the range. So what you did last year in the memo sounds good to me.
Anybody else have a firm opinion on that topic?
It's going to be, needs to be left a little general and allow for variability in implementation.
Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to get a grievance every time something goofy happens with the student body and it impacts that minute, right? So, okay, I'm going to go then to number 4. This one is a really important one. This is something where in the past we have compensated a certified person who goes above and beyond their contract. Let's say they give up their 30-minute lunch-free period, which is a good thing, right? Everybody needs a chance to breathe from their kids in that sense. But they give up their lunch and they cover lunch. And we have said in the past, you can take $10 or you take it, earn an extra hour of personal leave for that 30-minute lunch period. And each building has a different lunch period. We have had a strong interest in making that go away. I think we have a very strong solution in that policy. And by the way, if you look in the staples, the first one we just talked about, this is the one we are now looking at page 2. If you look at GCMD, so the policies are there and highlighted. Exactly the question I'm trying to get clear on. Aaron and I's interest, and I think Will's on the same page in all the principles, is we do not compensate people with extra time off. Because that is the variable or the thing that's most precious to us is minutes. And supervising students and children is covered by minutes. And that makes it a very unique industry in that sense. So giving people extra time off when it's a 156-day contract is difficult. So we have not, but $10 is, I wouldn't do it either, right? So it was the wrong amount. We had tied it to not to the dollar amount, but to that top left cell on the salary schedule. So whatever the BA0 step 1 would be the rate, which is a good policy solution, because then every time we don't have to come back and do inflation on that number and argue about it. It just goes up as the salary schedule improves. Makes sense. So now we got a strong number, and CBT said, what about creating an MOU that for the next year we would continue to offer 2 options? Now you have 2 legitimate options, right? I think there's some reasonability to that solution, so that I can see that, right? I'm also have a strong interest in not use time as a way to compensate people. I'd rather budget it and make sure that we are paying people who give extra. So I don't know if people have an opinion on, shall we try another year of having an option? Or the answer is no, David, earning personal leave is off the table.
That amount is there, Doctor?
It's $36 an hour approximately right now.
Yeah, I have pretty strong
Yes.
opinion that it should not happen next year. The time off is earned. Because in theory, if I'm doing this correctly, if someone had to do that 4 days a week for 2 weeks, they would have a full school day off. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then we would pay them and pay a sub, and then they would be with their kids. And obviously that would represent that maybe there's an issue at the school. One person is having to do that all the time. But yeah, my strong opinion is no.
We
What's the,
estimate. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
So, sorry, what's the CBT logic in doing an MOU? I mean, I do want to comment, because one of the comments was that they would like a non-admin voice, but there's nobody here. And I think we changed the policy last year to specifically allow CBT to come to the board and present their voice. So just make that clear. There is nobody here, so we have to listen to your voice in terms of what CBT voice is. So what's their thought and thinking on that?
It's a sweet deal to be able to cover lunch for 2 weeks and get an extra day off beyond the time you're already given off.
But what does the 1 year of doing both accomplish?
They think it might be easier to sell because some of them believe that people will choose the better dollar amount because it's competitive now. And thereby we can just let the earning personal leave slide off the table versus having to make a hard nope, that option's off the table. It's just money else available. I think they see a sellability. If the money is competitive enough to motivate people, then the other option will just fade. And over a year, we'll have the data then to prove that it's okay to take it off the table.
I mean, I would say I have no reason to believe that would be the case. And I think as we've discussed in multiple meetings, what's best for students is not to have a teacher who builds up this time and takes potentially a day off every couple of weeks because they can. And I'm not saying that I know that's happening, but if we know that's not what's best for kids, I don't really care if it's easy to sell, but that's just my opinion.
Appreciate it. That's why I wanted to have that comments here tonight.
Yeah, I would ask, why wouldn't we just pay them their hourly rate versus the BA step? Just curious.
One's in the budgeting thing. There might be an equity thing people might bring up. just trying to find an equitable
Tracking
solution.
it could be potentially difficult.
Well, the equitable piece makes sense. So you're not being paid to be in your
Yeah.
classroom, you'll be there.
Someone's getting paid less to do the same.
Yeah, I would agree with Jen. I think we should not be giving benefits out for covering a lunch duty. And I also think that this is probably specific to not all of our buildings. I don't think all of our buildings cover lunch versus some of them, like elementary, pay somebody to do lunch, correct?
Yeah, I think this does on just the lunch piece. I think this also would give us then the financial data to say it's worth investing these dollars to hire that person who might provide sub coverage and also those other things. At a middle school, as an example, you do want somebody who knows middle schoolers, who has a relationship with them and enough set of eyes to make sure you're managing recesses and those things. There are spaces where you need to be thinking about that. But I think we have capacity to do that. I think this is the right number. When Aaron built the budget, we looked at some of the line items that we haven't been spending and expenditures and said, I think we can cover this financial risk at about $36 an hour at the moment. So Karen, did you have something you want to add?
Why, a couple questions. One, yes, why does it happen often so does the high school not have a covered paid lunch person?
No, they do not.
Okay, so teachers just take turns.
Yeah.
And look at that credit.
Correct.
And does the district still have a substitute shortage?
We do. And then there's another piece that we're talking just lunch. You also have giving up your prep period, which is why that was the first question. If you give up your prep period, which is allotted to you to cover someone's class, and that is happening in all buildings on a regular basis. It's also good to know the magnitude. Aaron's estimation is that by the end of the year, 180 days will have been earned in total. Like if you were to, so it's not a 10 days of being earned, 180 days are being earned in personal leave.
Yeah, get it. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
Would it be beneficial to hire someone to cover lunches at the high school?
I think that that's something we can look at once you make this move. I think it starts to set up the financial argument to say, let's hire somebody at a rate that previously wasn't of interest, because we used to have people and couldn't refine them. But to say, no, we need to invest in a better solution for some paraprofessionals or
Right,
some
but
coverage.
180 days of subs. I mean, you have to admit, but
Right.
So it's earning more than a full-time position.
Total across the whole district, yes. A full-time position would be 156.
So that's, yeah. And they would be consistent and the students would know them and have a rapport.
I think there's ways to solve it, but that's why, from my perspective, you'd want to take this option off, but I'm trying to make sure I honor everybody's voice.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to take the option off. I don't believe we should be appointing more PTO for covering lunch. If we know that it's an everyday thing that someone is covering lunch from middle school to high school, then we already can calculate that cost, right? If we're saying this is $36 an hour, we can do that math, $36 every lunch period for the whole year, and we can see what that total is, and then decide if we should even now just make the move.
Yeah.
To have it, right?
I think, I want to speak for Aaron. These are some of the last pieces in his budget that are hard, or some of these questions here, because it changes some of what he has to do to plan his budget. But Aaron, you want to say something?
Yeah, I've been struggling with this one, and I think you know that, David. I have gone back and forth about a million times because I'm pretty passionate about honoring staff opinions on it, but also, and so I've had a question like, why am I opposed to it, to earning personal leave? And, because I'm pretty opposed to it. And I guess I haven't been at the last two CBT meetings where this was actually discussed. So I don't know if they've heard my voice, but I'm pretty opposed to it, not because I'm opposed to people taking time off or getting time off, but 180 days is a ton of time earned, especially when large chunks of that time is getting an hour for covering a half an hour. I also am opposed to people not getting their lunches. I'm opposed to asking people to give up their prep period every single day. And we're doing that in a lot of instances. And that may not be exactly what staff wants. And I can understand that. And they can disagree with me. And I'm open to that conversation. Financially, though, I mean, that's a huge impact. And I think we're paying subs for every single one of those hours that they're missing while we're paying the salary. Now, there's two pieces to it, though. The other piece to this is it is hard to get subs to cover 1 and 2 hour shifts. And so having somebody that's taking off for a sporting event, this is a pretty slick solution to say, hey, we we have somebody in-house that's willing to do it, and we don't have somebody that's going to come in for 1 hour to do this, especially at $20 an hour. So, okay, we're going to pay $35 an hour to do it. That seems fair. And that's fair to is a subjective term, but I think when we're looking at 180 days, that's best guess. I think it'll actually be a little bit higher than that. It's just when we went through the argument of should we hire another long-term sub, I'm sitting there thinking that long-term sub doesn't cover this one problem. We still need another 30 days to cover this one issue on top of a long-term sub when we're already over budget on our subs this year. In addition to that, we're going to have multiple people cashing out time at the end of the year because we have a few people retiring and looking at critical shortage. That's going to cause us to go over budget. So it's a weird thing because on the one hand, I want to honor the fact that I understand what they're saying. To your point, though, Matt, you asked the question, what's the thinking on that? I think we've also heard from at least one administrator that it would be a huge culture shift and that would be hard in their building to deal with the culture shift. And I think that was kind of what CBT was saying to you is we want to see if it's that big of a culture shift or not. We think it would be a big culture shift. Maybe it won't be, and everybody will just take the money and it won't be a big deal to just go away from it. I don't know the answer to that, but I think that was at least an opinion we got from an administrator. This is one of the few things that I'm actually pretty adamant that I don't like. And if you all decide to go the other direction, I can support that and I'll support staff because I want to support staff however we can. But it's a huge number at the end of the year that we cannot then put back into salaries and we cannot then put back into, salary schedules and retentions and all those types of things. And so that's where I stand on it. Welcome to have people disagree with me.
I mean, my one, and you might not know this, but saying it's a huge culture shift, is it generally the same people in every building that are consistently covering? And so it would really just affect the few people, or is it really that the teachers are actually rotating through and they're all taking turns earning their hour of PTO?
I think there's too many scenarios to be able to make a generalization like that.
Also, just that time in front of students is invaluable. We treasure our teachers and we value their time with their students.
And they are allowed that prep time, which, in my opinion, that's super valuable time to prepare for your classes and prepare for your students. And if you're not having that prep time, then why are we giving them? I mean, again, how many teachers are doing this? I do have. Is this on the same note? I'm going to talk about teachers subbing for other teachers in the classroom. Is this the same?
Yeah, this is teachers covering other teachers.
So I do have a comment. What if the teacher that's subbing for another teacher is certified in that subject area? Does that happen?
Meaning like an English teacher. So I'm out, another English teacher covers. Yeah, it happens commonly. Or a second grade teacher's out and second grade teacher takes their free moment and covers their class for them.
And I'm assuming that's kind of in an emergency situation. You don't have a sub, you don't help cover.
Yes, but I'd say it's almost daily in every building.
It's a secondary issue more than an elementary one because of coaches.
Okay, because I guess my first thought was, well, if you're a certified teacher, you have this salary, why are you getting paid at a BA level 1?
Which would be more what Joe is saying, right? Being paid at whatever their hourly rate is.
Yes. Did you say that? Yes.
Yeah, but I was thinking more on lunch. But I do agree that a set salary to cover lunch versus covering a classroom.
Yes.
I would agree that a certified person covering another classroom
Should get their.
but it's kind of in there.
Well, and my question with that would be, though, if they're covering another classroom, are they really walking into that classroom and teaching, or are they walking into that classroom and making sure the kids are safe?
More
because to
often than
me-
not, it's the latter.
So to me, then you keep it equitable by giving everyone the consistent hourly wage. The English teacher isn't walking in and having to prep and teach the English class. They're walking in and making sure kids are safe. So to me, that's a little bit different, right?
I guess it would depend on the situation.
Right?
I mean, if you had knowledge to teach the class without using their lessons and grading, yeah, I guess it would depend on the situation.
But regardless, what this says without the hour of personal leave would be, I cover your classroom and you're paying me an additional $35 to cover that cost.
Mhm.
Because I mean, you're already being paid on your salary schedule, so you're being paid a
And with
extra
that, what they're
35.
doing that during their prep time again, or lunch, or
They give up their prep or their lunch because we say in the previous policy that those are times when they get to be alone without student supervision.
okay.
And I would warn against their hourly rate because that would be a nightmare for payroll.
No, that
I
makes
mean, I
sense.
do feel like it would be pretty inequitable because then essentially you could have a teacher that's at the highest end of the pay scale who always volunteers to give up their prep period to go cover a classroom because they know they're going to get paid that higher hourly wage. And if they're still not necessarily teaching that class, then essentially they can still sit there and have their prep period while they're getting paid on some level. Like, to me, that feels very inequitable. Like, it feels like we get into really inequitable water really fast.
And record keeping would be your nightmare.
Right. I mean, I definitely feel like everyone, if you cover, it's the same. You know, if your hourly wage is 50 and someone else's is 25, you shouldn't get 50 to sit in the class while they get 25.
You're
I
getting
think you
paid
guys-
to give up your
Right.
crap.
I think the key question I needed to know was no, not an option. That's what I hear people say. And also just because I just want to be clear, I'm not saying this is the cause. We do have a staff or a sub shortage. I'm not saying this is the cause. It is what they would call a wicked problem with lots of different inputs and outputs all mixed together, and we have to unravel it. And this is one of the inputs that keeps it from settling out and seeing what other solutions we can do to, again, we want our teachers prepping. We want them to have lunches. We want them, because I think we want our teachers enjoying their jobs. And I think that's essential to enjoying your job. Pandemic solution was all hands on deck. So if you had a free hand, you were on deck. And I think we got to break that cycle. So this is that piece. Any other closing comments on that? So the part I want to say is from CBT, I think we've got those policies ready to go. They've gone to our legal, and it says legal approved. That means we've had our lawyer look at it, redline it, and she didn't say, yeah, that's dead in the water, David. Who came up with that idea? Right? The lawyer said, well, I want to change, every Matt laughs, but every lawyer has to put their thumbprint on everything they read. Right? So they flip it around and reorganize it. All I cared about was the team said we'd like this solution, and you didn't tell me that was illegal or dumb legally. So we're going to go with what the voices say. So I'm excited to have those done. The next one are the green, how I've labeled them. These are the leave policies. First thing is sick leave and personal, that the team has said, yeah, they do believe going to a PTO solution is the preferable way to solve it. So that's a win that everyone sees that. Let's not get and separate out personal and sick. I think that's a great win. It's got an asterisk beside those word repeals on 8 and 10 because, well, that depends if we can all agree on PTO policy. I have provided that to them. Our lawyers looked at that. We have, an approved lawyer thing, and I have no feedback from them to date. So I can't offer anything else. So this is my question that I would like on number 7, why I have that highlighted, is the board, your guys' chance to say, David, I do not want to have this next year still a conversation. I want this wrapped up. I want a PTO policy. You figure it out. Right? That's the only question I can have because I don't have another piece back from them to bring to you to ask a question.
David, I would not like to discuss this yet.
Okay.
Except
That's
at,
clear.
except at the May meeting to finalize it.
Okay.
And I know there's been discussions of when, but we meet May 9th, if I recall. 14th, sorry. I don't know how many days ahead of that you need to build to get that done, but
Let me just ask a question there. You guys have been very clear with me. You expect May. Kind of said May 1st. Is by the May meeting, May 14th, if I get the work done, is that meeting my deadline? Like, is there any gray zone, or is it May 1st at midnight, buddy, you better meet your deadline, or do I have any gray zone there to push and make sure it's just ready for you guys to act on in the May regular meeting?
I think ideally we would have it at least the weekend before the May meeting,
Mhm.
because there's always so much stuff that comes in on Tuesday, and you end up spending a lot of the afternoon prepping for the meeting. So
Early.
yeah, I mean, I think just before the meeting feels appropriate. I wouldn't hold you to a May 1st deadline, but I do feel like moving forward with all the work that Aaron and Sheila have done to sort of start to research and clean this up, in my opinion, if we're all feeling like a PTO policy is the best way to move forward, then let's just move it forward and get legal and get CBT and get it done so that we start the next year with new staff and whoever under the new policy.
Anybody else want to add to that? You're saying what I expected, so this is good.
I think you know that it's a good thing Jody's not here tonight. Because
Her opinion is clear to me.
I also know that you have allocated way more time and energy to this than we had talked about.
Maybe.
And so Kim usually sends out the meeting book by the weekend before, and I would say it's ready to be acted upon at the May meeting and in that packet at the very latest.
I'll be able to do that because I got to send to ratification. I'll be able to send you what they're sending out for ratification. I don't think that'll be a problem for you to be able to see it in time. I just wanted to make sure that, right? We've said May 1st. I wanted to see, is May 1st the before the May meeting, or was it May 1st, get your taxes in by midnight stamped? Okay. Anybody else then want to add to that piece of clear directions that Jen said so eloquently?
In the green policies in general,
Just that first one, number 7.
May meeting.
Okay. Now I'm to 12 and 13. We've had a lot of discussion about these. I know they've been hot potatoes. They're really not the most important things to someone in my position. What's important to me is they're absolutely clear. They are not, right? If you ask me, I think they should go away. That is my recommendation. It hasn't changed. I know you guys have been around kind of trying to think about it. This is that time where I kind of need you to say one of two things. David, on a long-term leave policy, bring back, I can go edit and figure out how to write a long-term leave policy that is more catastrophic or medical, which you guys have made clear is what you're open to. I could write that. All right. Are you at that place where you, David, revise it and make it quality, or David, make that go away and make sure the PTO policy can take care of people? To extend into that, there's two things. There are 3 interests that I and others in the CBT have identified. One is, if I leave the district, can I come back a few years later? Let's say I'm taking care of a family and I'm hired back right where I was at. That's in the policy suggestions we have. That's the next policy to talk about in purple. I don't see any problem with that. That resolves one of the 3 things. I think we should do that. If somebody leaves at step 12, next time they come back 3 or 4 years later, hire them back. That takes away one of the needs for long-term leave. The second reason long-term leave is called portability, which is something we stumbled into. Our lawyers hadn't really explored this, but basically what portability says, and a reason I might want a long-term leave, is I don't lose tenure. We call it non-probationary status, right? It's a contract, right? It's an owner right. It's something you own. So if I go from DPS and I come to Salida, and before you hire me, I say, hey, I want to bring my property right with me, called my tenure or my non-probationary status, then that comes with you. That's already went through the state Supreme Court, right? So there we have a policy around that already in place. It's not a choice we get.
Wait, so that's a thing.
That's a thing already.
If they're tenured in Colorado, they come tenured to us.
If they bring it forward, there's a lot of nuances to it. But if there's another reason for a long-term leave policy is because you want to keep that property right. I can see why you would have a strong interest in that. It's already in our policy, but nobody's really asked the question of. It's always what if I come from Jefferson County to DPS, right? Switching districts. Not what if I leave Jeffco, go home for 3 years, and come back to Jeffco? Can I maintain my portability or my tenured non-probationary status? And the answer is yes. So if you left Salida, came back 3 or 4 years later, and said, when you're in the hiring process, that I want to make sure I bring that property right with me, then that comes. So for me, that resolves 2 of the 3 issues why a long-term leave policy would be of interest that are already either we're making the change or already in place. The third one is somebody wants a leg up in the hiring process, right? They get to be at the front of the line for hiring. And for me, I have an interest that if we have a great teacher, they're going to get rehired. If there's a teacher who their teammates or their supervisors didn't enjoy working with them or didn't think they were highly successful, I'm okay with them having to compete with anyone else who might have an interest in that. So obviously other people would have a different perspective, but that's how I believe a mom or a dad might think of it. So that's long-term leave. So those are some learnings that I've been exploring in long-term leave, trying to understand what is the value in that policy. My recommendation is still to repeal it. CBT would like to maintain it. I need to hear from you guys of kind of where you want me to do. If we're going to maintain it, then I need to write it and revise it.
The one thing that I know we had brought up at the last meeting was the family situation through the state.
Mm-hmm.
And we were kind of asking to get more information on that. Like if a teacher does have a long-term health concern and we put them on long-term leave, that they are then able to receive the family credit. So do you guys have any further info on that? Because that to me seems like a pretty big benefit to a staff member if they can get that family credit. And if we essentially don't put them on long-term leave and they have to resign, then do they not have the option to get that family?
And Mandy, you mean identified, labeled as long time.
Right, and I would very specifically advocate at this point that this long-term leave policy would be only for FMLA approved situations. So we have those very clear guardrails. This already meets qualifications for FMLA, this is a major medical, whatever. And then I would just like to know that piece. Because I feel like that's a big benefit that doesn't cost the district any money, that if they stay on long-term leave, they get that or they don't get that.
So you're kind of crossing streams here. So FMLA doesn't have to be for you having a medical catastrophic event. It could be for my mother, my brother, my uncle, my mother-in-law for FMLA. And that's all federally protected. And it doesn't matter what leave policies you have, that time off is protected. The family, FAMLI, is something that the employee can opt into, and they have to pay for 3/4 before they're eligible.
They can opt in, they have to pay for 3 years,
3 years?
not to be eligible, but they have to pay for it for 3 years.
Right, but don't they have to pay 3/4 before they're eligible to start getting paid?
Hey Sheila, just to clarify, I think as I mentioned last month, and I think that's what Mandy is saying, my proposal or my idea was that if we were to have a long-term policy after someone got through FMLA and was done with that, that to apply for a long-term leave, it would need to be an FMLA qualifying event. PTO and sick pay would be gone. And then if it made sense for them to be on a long-term leave at that point, which I wouldn't even think would need to be a board issue because it would be an HR issue, if that would protect employees and allow them to take advantage of the FAMLI. Not
Yes.
that, you know what I mean?
If they have signed
Yeah,
up,
so what I
yes.
meant is like it doesn't cover, I just want to go travel for a year or I want to
Right.
get my education. Like that's what I meant. She explained it.
Following this guy.
Those are the
The only nuance I would say, and I would agree with that. I could see myself having an interest in that, but I would say FAMLI it's built and it's marketed as the ability to run concurrently with FMLA. So the point is you have 3 months of FMLA or 12 weeks of FMLA that you're guaranteed. So that's why it's a 12-week FAMLI policy. It's basically a policy. It's meant to run at the same time.
So, but why wouldn't think someone's benefits would be an issue during that FMLA?
So-
I understand. I thought my question is, for example, if you went through the FMLA 12-week period
Mhm.
and then you're sick in PT or whatever, and you couldn't work, are you saying that they could then not get on the FMLA?
No. So they could. Here's the thing. Our policy currently, the way FMLA reads in our policy, is your sick time and your PTO runs concurrent with FMLA.
Yes.
And so, however, the true FAMLI was built to run concurrent with FMLA. So it's a weird thing because the way our
Oh, I see.
policy reads,
Yeah.
they don't have to use FAMLI unless they exhaust all of that and FMLA. And then they would need some type of long-term protection to be able to be hired, to still have a job and get their FAMLI. However, FAMLI was not intended to be used after FMLA. It was intended to be used at the same time
So it
as
wasn't
FMLA.
intended as a long-term benefits policy.
No, it was,
Double.
yeah.
Double your length.
Yeah. Now that's, you can decide however you feel the best way to do it. That was the intent of it. And that's the way it's discussed on their website, is that they should be running concurrently if you're going to be involved in it. However, our policy is different than that. So it allows people to then say, I'm using my leave during FMLA to get fully paid, because FAMLI does not fully pay you. It only pays like 60%. And then at the end of that, I could then, if I'm still hired by the district and I'm able to take unpaid leave, then I could still get FAMLI. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That might be a good thing to support your staff.
So as
But
far
that's
as-
the intent of that.
As far as the state is concerned, an employee could take their 12 weeks, use their sick and PTO if they wanted to get paid. Maybe they don't need that money at that time.
Mhm.
And then they need 12 more weeks, but they haven't had a year to requalify for FMLA. So according to the state, they could then.
They could get paid, but only if they can take the time off. They don't, like, they're not, FAMLI doesn't guarantee any time off.
So that-
FAMLI is just guaranteeing the pay during time off. And
but
so that's
not
not actual
at a
time off.
termination.
Yes, correct.
So
They have to be
that's where
employed.
they would argue that a long-term leave
Right.
would be a benefit to that,
Correct,
even though that's not being mentioned.
correct.
And then in that case, the long-term leave, if we put those very strict guardrails around it, is not costing the district anything.
Correct.
But I do think it's important, as David mentioned and I mentioned last month, I want to protect employees as best we can, with the knowledge that that's not what happens at many companies, right? That we try to go above and beyond what many private sector companies can do. And I would never want a principal to not hire the person they want to hire for a job, ever. Like that, I would never feel okay with that.
I value providing that benefit, but also don't know how. I just struggle with the timings of everything. I don't know how, whatever family works, and how long they'll pay it, or how you integrate that person back into the district, if it overlaps a contract year and all those things. So as much as like that would be a tremendous benefit, it is going above and beyond what most employers would do. And that's why I would say to repeal both long-term leave and sabbatical with the other interests in mind, taking care of people to the greatest extent we can through our PTO and sick leave bank.
So the internet is saying that family leave benefits are available for 12 weeks per year, beginning the first day of your approved leave. So in reality, even if you were on a long-term leave of a year or 2 or 4, this just gives you 12 per year, which is really,
That's the point
it's
of
not
it.
like some extended, like, oh, you have a year off for medical leave and you'll be covered. Yeah. I guess it was sort of presented maybe in the community as this is something that would provide long-term care or benefits to an employee, when that is obviously not the case.
No,
So that's
so-
just good for us to know.
And there's more nuance, because we're not opted in because we're a government agency. So we're not opted in. So not all of our employees have to take it. To my knowledge, we only have one employee who did take it at one point, and that was an instance that recently occurred. That's what created the question. But that's the reason it's 12 weeks, is because that matches with the FMLA standard. And so you could, like, another creative solution is you could say, if you have FAMLI, that will kick in at the time of FMLA start, but that becomes kind of a nightmare in terms of administering that. And then saying after FMLA is done, you still have your leave. If you had FAMLI, you could use that. There's options out there. I don't know what you all want to do, but that's the intent of FAMLI. FAMLI is not intended to protect your job. It is intended to pay you while your job is protected federally. And so that is a huge piece. Now, the other thing that I think I said at another meeting, and I know it's tough, but David, you said the portability. That is a huge reason that people want a long-term leave policy, is because that is a big deal to staff. And when I was in the private sector and not in this, I didn't fully understand what that meant, because I don't think it's unreasonable for a staff member to say, I want that. They've earned that. I also don't think it's unreasonable for an administration team or board to say, you've told me you can't do the job for 6 months, 8 months, however long you've been out. Am I obligated to give you a non-probationary contract for the next 15 years? or how long does that go? You know, I think that's not unreasonable. Now, whether that's what you should do or not is different, but I think both points are reasonable points. And I don't think that that has always been presented that way.
I think it's important to get to the crux of what everyone wants and what will make most people happy. I want teachers to feel like they're safe, and I think in our district you are. And I want teachers to know that if they choose to leave for any reason, they can come back. Should a job be available that they have the most qualified person for, and the principal wants to hire them.
I think having that language, which is the next one, of where they get put on the scale. I don't know. I may be a little harsh here, but I think if you're good at your job, you're not worried about your tenure status. Not saying that's everybody, but I don't think that there is the medical component that I value, and I can see reason of having that in place. But I do think that is going above and beyond, and understand that we want to do that. But I also think that we don't need the long-term or sabbatical leave policies because of the way we could rewrite the other policies, bringing people in and protecting their main interests. And some of them are right, it sounds like, through the state. So,
Well, and they have the option to buy
That's what I was just.
products from American Fidelity. If they want to be protected long-term, they can buy that. And if you're going to change the policy where they come back in at the same step, then let them go get healthy and get healed. Because if they're paying for FAMLI, they can afford to pay for the American Fidelity product suite that we have, which truly pays them for a long-term absence.
And that is something that I know William's been working a lot on handbooks and making sure people know about their benefits. So that is something that is going to be made clear to staff that they have the option to buy that long-term policy if they want.
They recently just met with the American Fidelity reps. I think 3 or 4 of them were out here all last week in every building. I haven't gotten the final countdown from them, but I know they met with a high percentage of the people that they wanted to. And they went over all of that. It was also interesting. They went over an accident policy because some people who did not come to one of the 3 meetings didn't know that the accident policy was gone from the PPO 8 now, which is one of the ways we have to fund the PPO 8 to keep the costs out of people's pockets. And so American Fidelity had talked about that too. Got a couple of emails today from people because we're right in the process of renewing our PPO 4, our PPO 8 health insurances and making changes. We're in that time frame window now and trying to clarify that with some people. So I'll send some additional information out. But we tried to send a bunch of info out about the American Fidelity, what they've got, what you should ask about. I can't tell people what to do. I can just tell them what to check on. The people that came to the insurance benefits meetings, we talked about some American Fidelity stuff, but we also talked about a lot the flex accounts. We talked about the changes in the policies. And all of those people were, I think, pretty well informed. But we'll keep doing better and keep meeting with more people.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too far off track, but adults do need to look at their benefits, all of us, public sector, private sector, look at their employers, see what would happen if they can't work for years and know what's available in this country or from your employer, right? And it's great if the district has something they can offer people, but also this is something that people in the community buy on their own, just like car insurance and things like that.
I mean, I think the conversations get a little bit sidetracked, I feel like, because the long-term leave issue has never been about finances. It's been about job security and portability, which you mentioned. It's not whether they can afford to be away for 6 months or a year, whatever. So, I mean, from my perspective, it's not used that much by the district. It's something the teachers obviously really place a strong value on that could really derail this bargaining process over this one issue. it costs the district nothing to grant these teachers other than the rehire, which I would be in favor of, if possible, of somehow building some guardrails around that. And maybe there's two steps to it. You know, you get long-term leave if you're, and I don't know what the performance evaluations look like for teachers, but I've seen this time and time again with employers. They come to me, they want to fire an employee. I'm like, what's their evaluation? It's like, oh, we give them good evaluations. I'm like, well, that's your own fault, you know? So at some point, the district needs to take accountability. If you have a poor performer and it's a teacher, it needs to be documented. And if you come and you say, this person's applying for long-term leave, and then they all have all these good performance evaluations, and then you're saying on the other hand, well, we don't want to hire them back. Well, it's like, you can't have it both ways. So I think the responsibility is on the district to give honest performance evaluations and have a long-term leave policy that says, if you're a poor performing teacher, you're not going to be at the front of the line when you come back to be rehired. If you are, and again, I don't know what the performance evaluations look like, so I don't know how you'd frame a policy, but to me, there needs to be something to address that concern from the admin side of you know, we want to be able to pick the best teacher. If you have a good teacher, you're obviously going to hire them back.
Now, doesn't that open you up to the huge liability? Isn't that part of the whole question about the way the policy is written right now, legality
Don't you
wise?
think, like, if a teacher comes in and asks for long-term leave and you say, well, let me pull out your employee file, yes, no.
Well, I'm not saying yes, no. I'm saying you get a different track. And again, you'd have to run this by legal. I'm just kind of.
I understand. I think, Matt, what you bring up a question is what I'm at. I can figure out how to rewrite the policy. I just need to know whether I haven't written a policy that would be catastrophic medical, that would put guardrails, that would be clear, because I've recommended repealing it. I just need to know, I think, Matt, you articulated well, let's write one, but let's write a good one.
And the board doesn't need to be involved in the policy.
Right, that would be
either.
part of writing it well, was it's not a public conversation.
Right.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a board issue.
Right, I hear you on that. My question is, I've recommended repeal. I can see why we've talked about some of the interests. Somebody might bring up a fourth interest in keeping that. I just need to know if you guys want me to bring back a medical-based long-term leave policy that's well written and has the proper guardrails and clarity around it, or if you're on the place of you should repeal that. I've talked to Dr. Pettit before she left. She was clear that should be repealed. Like, that would be her opinion. I
think if it's not too much more work, or if it would keep staff happy and it's clear and well written, how would it hurt to have a long-term policy? Other than
the hardest part, if you deal with the other pieces, is going to be long-term leave. Therefore, is no let. Like, there's going to have to be, you must leave. Right? I don't want you half in this semester, half out this semester, half in. Right? There'd have to be some clarity, or else you're not going to get the kids a teacher solution. Right. So you'd have to go down that road, which may not meet everyone's interest, but you'd have to resolve that issue. And I'll switch real quickly. The other piece you'll see at the end here is I've asked the lawyers to look at FMLA. I brought that one back up. So it's on my little tracker. It's, that's 16, 17, 18. The reason I've asked it is two things in our FMLA policy. One, I've asked for them to get really good, clear writing that it's concurrent, so there's no confusion of when does FMLA start. We just kind of ran down that road, why I want that. And two, we don't have anything in our policy. It's clear that when you run out of FMLA and your leave, like, what is that hard line? So there's nobody making a hard line. The policy says when you run out of leave, you're no longer employed with us.
So David, I was wondering how that works in education, because I know in the private sector, you run out week 12, you can't come to work, you're separated from the company, you're on corporate benefits, and that's that. But I know it's so different with teachers' like their employees.
So I've asked the lawyers to get that clear because it's not clear for us. We haven't ever really dealt with it much, but we need that clear. We don't have it.
Because we have to have a consistent policy.
Right. There has to be a policy that says it's not about who's reading the policy.
Yeah.
That has to be a hard line that's crystal clear.
Thanks.
So
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I guess it was just to try to kind of give you a more consistent wrapped up answer. I'm kind of with Matt on if this is very important to teachers, it does cost the district nothing. I'm okay having a long-term leave policy, but in order to have the legal protections, I do feel strongly that it has to be the FMLA guardrails. So I believe if you want to take a year in travel, you want to take a year and go get your master's degree, whatever, I don't think you qualify for long-term leave. I think that's on you, and you can come back, and if you're a good employee, you'll be rehired. So in my mind, that has to be the guardrails, is that it's just sort of a major medical FMLA kind of scenario.
And if it were up to me, I would feel okay having a long-term leave policy as long as the principal, again, hires you.
okay, I get what you're
Yeah.
saying. Anybody else? I've got 3 voices. I don't want to go too fast.
I appreciate all things that have said, but I think it should be repealed. And majority, if not all, of the interests are captured in the rewrites of the other policies.
And I think it would make more peace and more people happy if we had one. So I would say, yeah.
Okay, that gives me some direction. I'm going to try and find some language and work with some lawyers. That doesn't mean anybody's committing to that position. It means that I know what work I can do to see if I can explore and solve the problem. Let's do sabbatical leaves. The same question. It's different, but it's the same. Matt, do you mind starting? Because I feel like you've articulated an interest in keeping us.
Yeah, I mean, I've reviewed a lot of district policies just because I have no baseline. And when I'm, trying, like Aaron, trying to figure out what other districts are doing and like, what's the baseline here? And it seems like a lot of high performing districts have sabbatical policies. So I would be, again, in favor of keeping this. I think it does. This one's a little different because it has a little bit of cost to the district, but again, hasn't been used that much. So if there's some ways to put some additional guardrails on that to ensure, we don't get 5 or sabbaticals in 1 year, which, would be hard for a small district like this to absorb. I would like to see that. On the salary schedule, I think if we're telling teachers on one hand, there's opportunities to unfreeze yourself by doing professional development. One way they do professional development is they take a sabbatical and, get extra training. So, that gives them the opportunity to do that.
Would you limit it down to higher education formal coursework, or would you leave it broadly defined?
I would prefer it be specific to education. I think the one we had with the coaching was sort of an odd
Yeah, and the
fit.
one before that was atypical as well.
But I would, I think it needs to be educational related. That's going to further your career and further educating students.
Okay. Somebody else want to respond to that?
I was just going to ask Matt, in your research, because when I asked around just teacher friends around the state, our policy seemed a little more generous in that you were guaranteed to go back into your classroom at the end of your sabbatical, where the school districts I spoke to, that was not a guarantee. It was more like, if there's a job available, you interview. Did you look into that around the state?
I didn't get to that level of detail, but that would be something I would be open to. I mean, it sounds like they probably had a sabbatical policy. It just wasn't as generous as ours.
Yeah, ours, when I surveyed people, but I
Yeah.
didn't do like a deep dive. Just
Yeah.
I asked friends around the state, and
Right.
ours seemed more generous on that.
I think we're more generous on a lot of fronts.
Which is a good thing, but it's
Which
also
is a good
as
thing.
long as it's
Yeah, I
clear.
just didn't know what the norm was. which
And I
was
wouldn't
like-
know. I haven't done the research because I recommended a repeal.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's, again, a reasonable point to negotiate. It's like, yeah, I think if you take a sabbatical, I don't know. I mean, I need to look at that a little more because the sabbatical does seem like a little more of a guarantee that you're going to come back into the classroom. It seems a little odd that you'd have a sabbatical.
It's different because you're getting a salary on some level.
But not have a ability to come back into the classroom. Yeah.
Either yours or I thought in the past we talked that we've seen sabbatical policies that are unpaid to go, which, I would say I'm a little softer on keeping sabbatical versus repeal because of Matt's points. But it doesn't need to come to us, I don't think. And B, there needs to be specifics that building leader would approve that with you or something along those lines. I think an unpaid sabbatical is completely appropriate. And then obviously there's a component of, the thing I don't like about either one of them is the aspect of coming back and assuming you're coming back. And we have that piece of, well, is there a position available? Where do we put them? Did we hire a great teacher and now we got to figure out what to do with them? I don't like the fact that both of those policies kind of somewhat hamstring our administrators.
It would also be interesting to know if we were to have that policy continue, if there could be guardrails or criteria again, where a board wouldn't feel like, oh yes, no, that I don't like the district being put in that position. I feel like it should be an easy HR issue based on key criteria.
Flow chart, and if you flow through it, then the answer is yes.
Yeah, I don't want to tell people in a small town yes or no.
And I can look at those sabbatical policies I looked at, Jen, and sort of email everyone and just say, here's what I found in terms of what they say. Here's the district.
I guess my other thought, what Joe was saying with paid versus unpaid, if we do keep it, I would probably advocate for it to be unpaid because we already have the policy that we were just talking about paying for education and professional development. So if we limit the sabbatical to just being in pursuit of education and something that's going to improve their teaching career, then we're almost paying them double. Like if we pay for their education and then we pay for the sabbatical, I kind of feel like if we're already paying for potentially the education that they're taking the sabbatical for, that the sabbatical is not paid.
Because then you're also paying the person in their spot. So it's sort of a triple hit.
So, I guess I'm kind of like, I would say repeal it, or I would be okay with keeping it if it's unpaid
And clear.
and clear that it's just for them furthering their education and maybe a time frame too, like the sabbatical is 3 months.
And clear on both ends.
Right.
And then if we have the timelines, then maybe we're able to hire long-term subs versus a teacher, and then that person is coming back. And I agree with Matt that maybe this should be based on performance evals too. That on some level, right? Like if you have had terrible performance reviews, you shouldn't necessarily get to go on a sabbatical.
I hear you. I'm going to be reticent to tie performance to any of these decisions.
Is that legal liability?
Yeah, it opens up some hard conversations where you can get a yes in one situation, the next person gives a no, and those inconsistencies are your weak spots. I see people's head nodding at unpaid. I'm going to say that out loud. Unpaid is a more palatable keep than paid.
Right, because we already have to pay a sub to cover that person the whole time that they're gone.
So it's a job protection mentality.
So is the thought then, I understand the paying the sub. I can go either way on the paid or unpaid or partial payment. But the question I think Jen brought up, and Matt, I don't know if you ran across that too, is are you entitled to the job you left or a job that's open? That's kind of a fundamental difference.
And I'll work with our principals and see. I just need to know rewrite and how to do that. And I think those are the key questions I have to look at. But unpaid is a essential question that I would need to know because then you're talking about job protection versus it's versus something else. So
I think you also have to look at, is it equitable? Because the only people that can take a sabbatical would be our certified staff. Our classified staff cannot take a sabbatical.
it would definitely just be a certified privilege.
It would, not to take us too far off track, but it would be interesting to see how that would factor into our long-term policy as well.
Yeah, I think that's why I'm asking about job protection because it might be
Yeah.
there's one policy and it covers both with clarity because you're talking about My brain can get there. I just needed to know that where you guys were sitting. You guys have given me some good insight on that. And I will work on that piece. I'm going to go ahead and say that's kind of where we're at. The key question for me that you got answered was number 7. You guys said make it happen, Dr. Blackburn. So we're going to make it happen. And we got some clarity on those really complicated but rarely used long-term leave policies and sabbatical. You've talked about FMLA and understand how that fits into this storyline, even though it's not negotiated. The next one I was excited about. I feel like it took time for people to understand because these are complicated things, but in that purple section 19 through 31, and there is a mistake in there, just to let you know, it should also have what is on your guys's sheet, number 32, just so you know, what is 32 on the last page. That should be in that purple section and shouldn't say address next year. That's a typo someone caught for me today. But everyone has agreed upon and everyone's the same place of, it's just an organizational thing. So I'm excited that clarifies that. So when it says at legal, that means I've sent it off to our legal team to have them review it. The key one we're looking at then that's stapled into your packet is what we've been talking about in different places. And I think I have some clarity, so I'm going to try and say out loud what I'm listening to. You've got highlighted on GCBA-R-N professional growth schedule placement 2 key issues called positioning on scale. They are highlighted in yellow. The first one is moving to step 15. We've been pricing that out. I hear from the board a high interest in seeing how we can do that and making that happen sooner than later. Am I correct that that is something?
That was the 75,000?
Yeah, it's about 75,000 right now by our analysis based on the outline or structures we put in place to make that math problem.
If the numbers come back where we're closer to 15, but we're not to 15, I think that's worth taking. We get to 10 or 12, but yeah, that's
It's a high interest to move the needle on that, if not get all the way to 15.
Yes.
I mean, it's like that's something we hear from our new teachers, or I know I do, from our newer teachers that have, they made the choice to come here, but that was a tough call, and if we really want to get the best people we can, seems like a fair incentive.
And in a competitive environment, I don't think we can afford to.
Yeah, and do you feel like that's been an issue with hiring this year? Like, so if we had that, yeah. So you feel like it will make a big difference in who we're able to hire?
So while it maybe wouldn't be a huge priority of CBT, I feel like it is clearly in the best interest of our kids.
Okay, that's clear. You said what I expect you to.
Yeah, and despite what some people might think, I don't think we are just trying to hire the person at the lowest level. But we're trying to hire the best teacher, even if that means more money.
Correct.
Well, and I think we should go back to 1993 and retired teachers, go ahead and give them a little bit of.
We will. We'll put that in the process and consider that.
We'll put you in the retention.
Yeah, just saying. Idea.
Right up there, top of the list.
Aaron, to be not even tongue in cheek about that, now that we are a critical short, we can hire retirees through para, teacher retirees through para, and currently, as of this morning, we were going to place them at step 7. If this were to change, we could then maybe place them a little bit higher. And what that does for that retiree, whether they're a Salida retiree or a retiree from somewhere else, they can keep their full para benefit. They can keep their full salary from wherever they're placed, and they can take that district insurance so they don't have to pay that para care piece. It's a good deal if people still want to work. And we've got a couple of people that I know are super interested.
I think he just offered you a job, Karen.
And can I add you to the list?
Yeah.
All right. The second one is highlighted there, and that is that piece around long-term leave. That's where this would be placed. I hear everyone saying, yes, David, that's of high interest to resolve this issue. There's no reason not to be rehiring people at the step level they left us at. Bring them back when they come back. Correct? Okay. I just wanted to that in this policy, you have the whole thing. This is also where there's some questions of upping some of the benefits to support, like national board certification, reimbursement rates. But CBT hasn't really offered me any feedback. They understand what I've offered, but there's been no feedback from them for me to offer back to you. That being said,
May meeting.
yes, sir. May meeting. I heard you. That gets us, that's a big group of policies. I'm really excited. I think we're gaining. So those are at our legal office to make sure that anything that I've done and gone through CBT and our teams and Matt and Jody have looked at it from your guys' perspective. You know, there's no big snafus. I'm sure she'll still bleed all over it, move paragraphs around, but I want to make sure that it stays the same. There is there's three more in there under this other category. I'm going to be honest with you. I've already got GBJ. I've already got it through lawyers. These are three that are not of high priority to me. If I could get all the rest and these aren't resolved, they're of high priority, 29 and 31 to our lawyer. But for me, they're not of high priority. They don't affect Aaron's ability to run a tight budget. They don't affect a principal's ability to run a tight programming ship. These are not my highest priority. So my question is, you might have to look at these later on. This may not be the evening you can do that, but you could email me or call me and say, David, they're of high priority to me. So you make that happen by May 2. So I'm kind of looking for any wiggle room because I want to stay focused on the things that are most important, like that PTO policy. This would be an area that if we can get it through and everyone's happy, great. If we can't, it's also not a hill I'm ready to die on. I would put it to next year. It's got to be fixed, but it doesn't necessarily have to be fixed today. So I'm curious if anybody has a problem with me, right? Again, I'm going to try and see what I can do, but I'm flexible there.
Yeah,
What you can
I'm
do.
fine with the next year. I do know in just looking at this, there are a handful of policies that are not negotiated that are being discussed. I don't know if they're in the CBT conversation or if they're just because we're doing the G policy review.
It's both
or if
and.
it's because they intermingle.
They intermingle, but if you're doing the negotiated and you don't understand how FMLA works, it's hard to make a good, intelligent adult design. So that's why I've done that, because I also want to make sure that our policies are in sync with anything that's negotiated or not negotiated. So I feel like you have to do it holistically. These three, though, are not part of a holistic solution. So that's why I'm flexible on them. And that just means a year. It doesn't mean they don't have to be fixed. It means not today. The last one I just want to make sure you guys saw would be taking out 32 because we moved it. So 33 through 37. These need to be addressed. I have all the red lines from the lawyer. I've talked to Matt and Jody. They're fine and would support a recommendation of saying those can wait till next year. Again, I just don't think those are essential to do right now. So unless somebody says differently, then I would kind of fill that out.
Can I just briefly ask about the sick leave bank one?
Yeah,
Sorry,
please do.
payback. It just
Yep.
sort of doesn't have anything written about it.
Yeah, that's fine. So number 9, which would be in the green group. When I suggested the PTO policy and gave that to him, it has attached to it a new sick leave bank, and I have no feedback from anyone on CBT of their perspectives on that.
So, because as it stands then, I think what we had said is repeal that and have that in PTO policy too.
It'd probably be 2 different ones. It would be 2 different ones, but it's a new one that's
There's just no policy.
cleaned up, basically. I think you still need a sick leave bank. I'd recommend it. It's how you deal with long-term leave, medical, catastrophic things, because you can offer in our district 32 days divided by 4. Obviously, that's 8 extra weeks off after you've exhausted all of your leave. And that allows us to cover a lot of catastrophic bad things that might happen to an employee and provide grace when they're out of leave. So. I have some clarity of some things I need to work on. I have some things I can go back to the bargaining team and give some boundaries, but also some areas where I can say I need some help on some writing some solutions and understanding other people's interests. So this was very helpful for me. I appreciate it. This is an ambitious project, but I think you do have to deal with it holistically, or else you get what we have, where you've got 20 different solutions all over the place and they don't talk to one another. So.
Okay. We good to keep going? Looks like it. Action items. First one, looking for a motion to approve on second reading the various policies listed.
So moved.
Thank you. Did Dr. Hill get some
We did get some
his
feedback
edits?
from,
I know he had specific comments that he wanted.
We had a
to get in
chance to
there.
review that. He's comfortable with going with the lawyer's recommendation language. He's not a strong supporter of their use of grammar, but
For the record, I agree with Dr. Hill. On both counts.
yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Ready for a vote?
all right. Mr. Hobbs. Mrs. Lundberg.
Aye.
Mrs. Pascal. Ms. Strickland. And Mr. Smith.
Aye. Okay, looking for a motion to approve operational wish list, the positions as recommended.
So
Does anyone need us to review what those positions are? I think we did a pretty good job, but if you need us to restate it, we can.
Or any other thoughts since our discussion, however long ago that was? I would probably say, just to point out as we continue these conversations of future grant risks, and probably all of those positions, I would assume, are critical to the operation in today's world. And we do know at some point we may have to absorb them in our budget. So. Managing the FTEs is always a interesting component. I've stated this a handful of times. I do think we're going to have a struggle in finding an ELL teacher. If we do, at what point in time does the team say, hey, let's connect with other resources to see if we can find a better paying support? I don't know what that role would be, but DHS, CMC, whoever else that could maybe help fund a position like that or
I
share
don't know.
services.
If I get to June 1 and I don't have someone in place, then we're going to be looking for whatever creative idea people have, and we'll have to bring it back to you at that point because I wouldn't have authority to do something creative. But
How much of an increase have you seen in non-English speakers in the district over the last few years?
The numbers, and I'll send them to you, Matt, but it's gone up. If I give you a number now and it's wrong, I'm gonna sound
Yeah.
bad. It's gone up quite a bit to where one person can no longer handle all of the buildings. And the other piece that's happened the last 2 years is and David talked about it earlier, is the kids that we're getting now are non-English proficient. They're called NEP when we test them. And that means a lot of times they've got not only no English, they've got very little of their home language. They can speak, but as far as writing and reading, it's always a challenge. And there's more and more of those kids coming. So it isn't like kids that write and read fluently in their home language. I think we're up to in the low 40s, mid 40s.
Yeah. I mean, just anecdotally, I've noticed a shift in demographics around town too. And I remember a couple of years ago when we had the CASB thing here where some other school districts came, and I remember talking with Summit County, and the amount of ELL language learners in Summit County shocked me. And again, I couldn't remember the numbers, but
it's half their student body.
It was an astronomical amount of ELL students at Summit County.
A lot of resort towns, like whether we like to call us that or not, quasi-resort town, that is a huge issue in Summit and Eagle and Aspen. And
There's a big change everywhere in the state. We've had a large immigrant influx of refugee status. There's lots of nuance here. There's refugee status, there's immigration statuses, and they all have different sets of rules. And they've seen some of our bigger districts in the Front Range are seeing in the thousands of these students since after October count. That's happened to them in the last 6 months. And so we know just natural progression is those families will start to move out of the Front Range and settle in other places, and we'll start to see that. So that's another thing. We also know this problem or this need is not going to go down. So
I don't know what Buena Vista is doing, but I do know that last month they had a community session to discuss their urgent need to fix that issue too, because they are seeing an influx as well. So.
yeah. And they have a large employer there who's also employing a lot of individuals of immigrant or refugee status.
Like the state does as well with the prison, I understand.
They do, yes.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Ready for votes?
All right, Mr. Hobbs. Mrs. Lundberg. Mrs. Pascal.
Aye.
Ms. Schickman. And Mr. Smith.
Aye. Okay, last one. Looking for a motion to approve resolution 2324-08, declaring surplus property and authorizing the sale.
In a second.
David, you want to talk this one through since it was a consent move?
This board has made it very clear in the last 2 years they're interested in divesting themselves of the Spartan Heights assets because they don't believe that's the most missional place, and to invest those dollars into programming for kids in some way, shape, or form. So that's what this is pulling that trigger. We own outright 1/2 of one duplex we've been offering as rental for affordable housing for staff. It's been nominally successful. The thing I'm proud of, as I mentioned in the work session, is that you guys are here, but multiple iterations of boards have invested tax dollars, and now we can cash in on those investments. And it provides more assets than we had. So I think it was a good use of your guys' money. You also invested stuff and rolled it forward and stayed everything in the black. And in the meantime, you created a micro neighborhood that had deed restrictions, affordable housing, a decade ago. And I know many of your other elected officials are struggling with that issue. So I appreciate working for school boards who show that kind of community leadership. Nonetheless, it's our time to divest ourselves of that. This allows you to do it. My question is, we have one that's being sold we don't own. So we're just facilitating finding a buyer in our side of our staff. We're hoping one of our staff picks up another one of these affordable housing duplexes. It's being sold at approximately $365,000. The resolution says not to exceed $400,000. That gives me a range of $35,000. Sheila's recommendation has been kind of doing the analysis as you would stay at the same number as what we just sold this month. And I've had other people say 400,000 is close enough to the same. I'd rather see a little higher. So I'm just curious. You got a recommendation from Sheila. I'd probably put it on the market at $365,000. We have selected a real estate firm who will do it for just 2% and take give us a coupon, so to speak. And they've been managing our apartments for us at a kind of a discounted rate. So that's kind of how we'll be doing it. But this would allow me to sign that contract with them and put it on the market for recommendation of 365, unless I hear someone say, David, push that number to 400.
I would say that 400 is still well below market. I don't know where the data is in regards to AMI because I don't know where that is and I didn't bother to look for it. But I know that the one that is currently being offered, they bought at a certain price. Other people bought at certain prices. They're not all the same based on timing. I am in favor of 400,000 just simply because of the fact that we've held it longer. There's no real obligation of what that dollar amount is, and it's still a pretty fair and appropriate number. So.
Can I ask Can I ask the condition it's in? I mean,
It's pretty it's new.
yeah.
Yeah, it's been
But
well maintained. It's still in the new size, what I would call it. 560 is the CMA. If you're talking about the analysis, would it be from a real estate agent? If it was just on the market open.
With no deed restrictions?
Yeah, no deed restrictions. If you were just selling it, 560 is the CMA.
And what are the deed restrictions? It can only increase
5% per year.
per year.
for 10 years, and then the deed restrictions fall off in that sense. So somebody, if they held on to it, they would make a pretty penny. They could definitely turn that. For us, if they stayed in the house for 10 years, that's a success for us.
And we don't know this, but we believe we have multiple staff interested in these.
Currently, for the current unit that's on the market right now, it's got about 2.5 weeks left. There's 5 people who've expressed interest. 3 have done the home tour. So
Why are the deed restrictions falling off? Why isn't it not permanent?
that's how, I can't really answer that question. I just know that's how it was recorded.
So it's already on there that way. It's not something we're doing.
Because we own this one, we could probably change this one, but all the other ones have a 10-year cycle.
Okay.
Did I say anything? Sheila, you've done the most analysis on that. Did I do it right? Okay.
I mean, I'm a little reluctant to get rid of affordable housing just because I know it's probably going to be an issue for future boards. But I also think our higher priority is educating students at the end of the day. And faced with those competing priorities, when we have this building here that we need to remodel and reinvesting those dollars into this building, which is going to be a big bill, makes a lot of sense to me. And I think we should get as much as we can from it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if we're looking for revenue, there's some revenue. Not a ton, but enough, and
Yeah. And
it's still a good price.
Can I talk to you about that?
Mhm.
So whenever this was sold to the community, we were the leaders in doing the affordable housing. And we restricted, there's 7 people that we restricted their price that they could resell their property for because we were trying to keep the price down. And now we're superseding, we're telling some people they can only sell for $250, but we're going to sell for $400 and up, when none of the other people that have purchased these prices with our deed restriction that we put in place when this project was originally started could sell their property for that right now.
Well, unless they waited 10 years and then the deed restriction would go away, right?
Yeah, they can wait 10 years. But as of today,
Right.
you've got a person that's selling theirs for $365, and we're going to turn around and tell them.
Oh, so there's somebody on the market right now that's selling
Yes.
for 365.
And they're being very, doing something that they don't have to do, which is offering it to our staff first before they put it out on the market. And I just think it's kind of bad karma to be selling ours for way more than what anybody else that purchased the property under the whole program that got put up out there at Spartan Heights, because that was to get our students into the trades programs. I mean, it was a very big deal whenever I first got here. So I just think it's really bad on us, and it's my opinion, if we go out there and say, well, we're going to do this because all of a sudden we need money. I just don't think that's a good community thing.
And
I know I value that opinion, and some people bought at $245 and some at $265, and I believe the highest was $285, and it's just, I get it, but I also think that we're still being very reasonable.
I guess my question, Joe, and it's simply a question, is if the purpose of the housing was for affordability for employees, is a $400,000 house affordable for our employees? And I don't know the answer. I'm just asking the question. I know on the current house, I believe there was 3 employees that showed serious interest. And I don't know where that has landed with the people selling it or their realtor. I can only assume that 1 or 2 of those would show interest in the house in the duplex that the district owns. And I get it. I mean,
And I would probably say if it's a district employee, that's one thing, and if it's somebody else, but then you're kind of giving preferential treatment to the one person that got lucky to buy a house. I mean, I think we accomplished the mission, and now we're moving forward to the next phase. So David brought a contract back for 400, I would approve it. If you brought a contract back for 365, I would approve it.
Yeah, I would say if we were selling to a teacher, give them the lower price.
Anyone else?
Are we going to open it up to staff?
Yeah, it starts with staff. I mean, honestly, if a staff member doesn't take it, I might bring it back and say, let's not put any deed restrictions on. I'll sell for full price, which Sheila might strangle me for that idea, but I want my staff in these houses. I think that's the win-win-win that I would always be looking for.
The owners of
sense.
that other property opened it up to staff
Well, as part of the deed restriction was a right of first refusal.
first.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be more comfortable selling to staff for 365, but if it's on the open market, yeah, I would probably want to get, I mean, I hear what you're saying. Joe.
And your question earlier just about your ELA numbers, your English language learner numbers,
Yeah,
since the 2021 year, you had about 16 kids, which one person can kind of handle. As of this morning, we're at 36.
doubled in 2 years.
All right, I think I have clarity, and you guys have an understanding. So when you vote, you're giving me authority to make this happen, and I got enough sense I can manage the contract.
Okay, any other questions? Ready for a vote?
All right, Mr. Hobbs. Mrs. Lumberg,
Aye.
Mrs. Pascal,
Aye.
Ms. Schickman, and Mr. Smith.
Aye. Okay, Mandy, any update on BOCES?
Yes, I did just have a 4-hour meeting and retreat on Thursday. So that was a good time. But no, it was actually good because it was the first time we've all met in person. And so it was good to actually get to know everybody and talk. And then Casby came and facilitated a 3-hour retreat, which was just kind of a good reminder going over like vision and policy and all of that. I think it was good to actually connect with all of them and recognize that BOCES does serve a really important role, like in some ways advocating for the most vulnerable kids in all of our districts. And I think sometimes when you're just on the Zoom calls and the superintendents have all met and we're just sort of like validating what they've already all decided is best for our districts, it's easy to forget that. So that was good. All of those other updates are for later.
Yeah, I'll just state they are looking at changing their organizational structure. I had Mandy come in and work with our staff and BOCES just so she could hear kind of firsthand. Most likely we'll be changing and adding another position at BOCES that would directly serve us. Right now we have a person that kind of serves more than one district and we get a piece of that person, but the key right now is to try and figure out the right job description, and then we would get to help hire that person. It moves a lot of job description responsibilities, so it's actually more complicated. But Aaron actually has gone through and he says it's a kind of a net zero cost for us in terms of building the budget. So it really comes down to job descriptions. So I'm going to look at it in a positive way. I think we're going to get some more support for the same amount of dollars we would be putting in this year. We're going to get some more support. It is going to be an interesting design thing in our special education department, and we don't know how to do that yet.
Yeah, and I think we also spent a lot of the meeting kind of looking at all of the data. And, you know, Susan was saying across the state, the data is all similar, but it's not great for our special ed students. So I think having the opportunity to look at restructuring and having more support within each district seems like it could be really good for all of our communities. And we have way more support than a lot of the other districts do. Like Park County and Leadville are just super small districts. So for them to have a full person would be impactful.
Yep.
It's always a challenge when we are the lion's share of size, and so that means we pay more. And how do you work that back that we're all getting equitable amounts of services back?
I'll continue to give kudos. I think Susan Udenberg, our new executive director, and Michelle, the finance person, are doing a great job. They are really trying to get that organization. They've made improvements. So we got to run with the waves, and we're going to try and take this change, which we wouldn't have chosen, and make it the most beneficial.
Yeah, and one other thing that was kind of good to look at, like, and I think it was really helpful that you kind of ran us through the budget priorities, because currently, like, the BOCES budget is at 30% overhead costs. and then like 60% going to staffing. So that's kind of another big thought of this restructuring is trying to get a lot more of that money to kids and to staff who's actually working with kids. So trying to cut down on mileage and transportation and office space and all those kinds of things that really aren't very helpful to our kids. So.
Very good. Facilities update. We've talked a lot. Do you have anything from our meeting, whenever that was, yesterday?
Thank you.
No worries.
It was, yeah, it was interesting and nice working with Commissioner Wood and Don Reimer, and I thought it was productive. We're moving forward. September is the goal, right?
September's the goal. I may be repeating myself from earlier, but I think it's important for the 2 people watching, if that's still the case. It was a good meeting with Commissioner Wood and the 5. Oh, nice. Hi, everybody. Commissioner Wood and Don Reimer and their commitment and understanding of the county land piece that we've identified as the fairgrounds extension property, if you will. David and I, and if anybody else is interested to join us next Tuesday to be at their commissioners meeting to kind of take that next step. We all have the same interests, but we all have a few different values to things with that property and vision and things of that nature. But we all think that it is very much achievable to be done before the next election cycle, where we would potentially have to start over since 2 commissioners are term limited. So we hope we can get some finite numbers and work the details throughout the next few months and have a final approval, whatever that looks like, by September as the drop deads. Pretty good. So I was appreciative that Commissioner Wood took the lead on that and kind of was the one that said, we'll have this done. So
Can I say one other thing just publicly, because I think it's important? So we're hoping to have that master facility plan out in front of the public until the next 30, 60 days so we start getting feedback. I'd want the public to continue to hear 2 things. The reason you do a large master facility plan is so that you can keep your taxes down, so that you don't have to pass unnecessary bonds because you didn't plan well. And the second reason is so you stay out of operational dollars, because you want operational dollars to go to salaries. If we can plan really comprehensively and really well, we have our best chance to stay out of operational dollars and our best chance to keep taxes down. That's the reason for a master facility plan. So people get a chance to start to see that in writing and get some feedback to you guys over the next 60, 90 days. We'll see how it rolls out.
beautiful. Communications, Jen and Matt.
Sorry. We're working on looking at a new provider for our internet, or not for our internet, excuse me, it's getting late, for our website and app platform. Just looking at some budget things and hoping to make a decision to be able to implement that before the new school year would be lovely, but some final details to work out yet.
Is that a lot of work on you, or is that a lot of work on Mr. Buckworth kind of in the corner?
It's actually the solution I'm looking at right now. The company will do the bulk of the work, actually. A lot of me providing things that we really already have. And Josh really would have like 1 hour of invested time from us, and then maybe 2 is what they promised me. So very minimal for IT, more work for me, but still would be a significant step forward for our website and our app connectivity to parents.
Hold the line with those third-party providers. Make them do what they promised.
That's the goal.
And you say 1 or 2 hours for that's just initial setup. That's
No,
not like
that's his whole, like, he would have to say, like, when you put our website address in, instead of going here, it goes here. Like, if that really should be his only time.
okay, so not monthly, not daily,
No,
but
that's like
one
that
time.
should
Okay.
be his- yeah. The rest of it, like the content, is still my job.
Yes.
So IT, it's really a minimal on his side, and just that communication piece. Yep.
Jen, Casby.
And I think it's more like that board training piece,
Which is
a little
great.
bit, which is great. And I didn't know, just wanted to put it there in case anyone's interested in going. It's a
Well,
slightly
it is
different format than it was
more
before.
beneficial than even chatting, which is great.
Yes.
Also, yeah, just I'm hoping to attend the legislative wrap up, but that's not till May 22nd. I would just advise everyone that we still don't know what will pass, or not. So maybe just not having chicken for the hatch is a great idea to manage expectations.
All right. Any DAC updates?
Yeah, just Ben's not here, but we will be meeting just before the main board meeting, focused on just making sure they're okay with where the budget proportions, that financial plan. So I'll be doing that. And then also looking at the master facility plan. I'm hoping to get all their feedback to bring that to you in the May meeting. That's the intent and the schedule. I'll probably also be having a lunch meeting kind of thing. We have a lot of more visionary people on our DAC currently, starting to queue up next year's strategic plan on the programming side. And so I'll be starting to work with them as I try and lay out some thoughts and structures. So when it come in August and saying, here's what I think the priorities are, here's how I think we should go through a community process for strategic planning on the programming side, because we'll have finances in place, we'll have facilities in place. We can just talk about programming for kids. That's where I'll be trying to work with them over the next 2 to 3 months.
Policy audit. No need to talk much there. I would love here's when we're going to get through the audit. Here's the plan. G-book hopefully done.
It's fun. We'll get done. It'll be next year. So G's the end of this year. And then this summer I'll go through. J's the only book of policy left that's pretty substantial. That's the one that deals with just student. That one's going to be large, but because you don't have to do negotiations, it's large and complicated, but it doesn't require so much collaboration time, which is good, but always exhausting. So we'll have it done. I'll be prepped pretty much by the end of the summer to finish it up next year.
Topics for future meetings. We added redistricting here, so I'd assume that means we need to consider that for this year or next.
Does need to be done, and I'd have to look for the actual where the requirement is, but I think it has to be done this year, and so it's established and approved for next year. I think, and I can double check that. It does need to be done.
Everyone understands what she's talking about redistricting?
No, would you please?
It's fine. So redrawing the lines around to make sure the representation of the 7 of you, particularly the 5 who are regionally, the lines get redrawn when you look at where people have moved and those things.
And as a board, we have some say into if we have more at-large seats versus not. And all
That
those
would be the
types of
time where
things.
you could switch to more at large rather than the 5-2 scenario you have.
So just putting that on the radar, just so we.
And the other thing, just since we're putting stuff on the radar, just realize the next year is also facility use planning, which sets your fees to rent our gyms as an example. And that's a large interest to your community. So the reason I want to get finances and facilities in place so we can enter into that conversation with as much structure and intelligence as possible, because that'll be lively.
Well, and I also think, there's further conversation about Pullman and CCU and all of that
Mm-hmm.
once we get going with the facility plan. I've definitely been getting some community feedback about that to share.
And that's the sort of thing that's queued up once we have a facility plan.
I did hear rumors of a rec district maybe being ran on the ballot, but it was very side conversation. So we'll see where
Next
that
year,
goes.
it'll be a front conversation, but not so.
The next April meeting, don't feel like we need it, so scratching that, so you guys can cancel that.
Yep.
In full. The May meeting, market night will be going on down here, so the May meeting will be entirely upstairs, and we'll try to reposition tables and chairs, maybe to not have people sitting behind us versus in front.
It's a weird, so we'll see if we can.
We may not even bother trying to record that on YouTube, so we'll see how that all works out.
We should.
Sure. Spend some time in market night. There you go. As David said, those community listening sessions will start coming out as the facility plan is done. And then Kim will continue to provide us all the schedules for end of year celebrations, graduations, things of that nature. So be on the lookout for those. I did skip agenda review. Anybody have interest in jumping on that one for May? Jen, you're on it. That's fine. All right. Can I adjourn or do I have to ask?
I think you have to ask which one to do it. Sorry.
Somebody want to adjourn us? Thanks, Jen.
Jen at 10:09.
I wish I could just do that. That'd be
Microphones,
easier.
please.
Yep, Mike.
Come on.